Chapter 182. Go to Watch Network. After Li Yundong left Xianba, Meiduo, and the others, he continued walking in the direction of the Himalayas. After running for less than half an hour, he suddenly heard the sound of a car horn behind him. Go to. He turned his head and saw two foreigners driving up from behind. They were holding cameras in their hands and were shooting while shouting and waving at him. Li Yundong smiled and waved at them. The Chinese tour guide, Lu Xia, who was driving, said with a smile, "Would you like a ride?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No need." Lu Xia hadn't expected that her invitation would be rejected. Her face suddenly fell and she snorted coldly in her heart. What's so great about him? Wasn't he just a little stronger and knew a few strange tricks? A god? I think he's more like a fraud. Why are you pretending? In fact, Lu Xia was full of curiosity about Li Yundong, who had a mysterious identity and magical power. She had wanted to go forward and talk to him, but these days, Meiduo had been pestering Li Yundong like a forbidden animal, not allowing anyone else to get close to her. If she wanted to get close to Li Yundong and talk to him, she would be looked at with hostility by the surrounding Tibetans. It was not easy for Li Yundong to part ways with this group of people. Lu Xia chased after him happily, but her kindness was rejected. She felt very depressed. She stepped on the gas pedal, and the jeep roared and drove away. Lu Xia drove the car and looked at Li Yundong, who was gradually getting farther away in the rearview mirror. She snorted and said, "If you have the ability, don't beg me all the time." After driving a certain distance away from Li Yundong, she slowly slowed down. She kept hanging in front of him all the way, and she could see Li Yundong behind her through the rearview mirror. At first, Lu Xia didn't pay attention, but after driving for more than 20 kilometers, she found that Li Yundong was still following in the rearview mirror and had not been pulled far away. No way! Lu Xia's eyes widened and she looked back. The two foreigners also noticed this situation. They turned back and kept shooting at Li Yundong with their cameras. As they filmed, they exclaimed, "God, this guy has been running behind us for more than 20 kilometers. Isn't he tired?" Lu Xia snorted in her heart. She stepped on the accelerator and gradually pulled him away. She didn't slow down until she couldn't see him anymore. Watch net. 7KOM. Rainbow ** literature _learning% super #speed. Update. It wasn't until noon when they stopped the car and had lunch by the roadside that they saw a small black dot on the horizon in the distance. The closer they got, the bigger it became. When the two foreigners saw it, they immediately exclaimed, "Are my eyes deceiving me? This guy has been running all this time. Hasn't he rested?" Lu Xia, who had just taken a bite of the dry food and was drinking water, suddenly choked on the water. She patted her chest and coughed, watching Li Yundong quickly pass by them with her eyes wide open. Li Yundong's speed was amazing. His legs were like steel machines, which made them feel that the person passing by in front of them was not a mortal, but a giant with infinite power. After Li Yundong passed by like a gust of wind, the two foreigners and Lu Xia looked at each other and quickly stuffed the dry food in their hands into their mouths. Then, they quickly ran back to the car. Are you kidding me? A car can't outrun a person. Is there any justice? Is there any law? They drove forward in a fit of pique and soon caught up with Li Yundong. However, after driving for a while, when they were about to rest at night, Li Yundong followed them like a ghost. The two foreigners were so scared that they shouted, "This is impossible. Is this guy on stimulants?" Lu Xia also widened her eyes and watched Li Yundong run past them again. She couldn't help murmuring, "Is this guy a robot? Why isn't he tired at all?" They didn't know that Li Yundong was only one step away from the Zhuji phase at this time. The Zhenqi in his body was vast and majestic. Before, when his foundation was not solid, he hadn't felt tired even running for a few days and nights, let alone now that the Jinqi in his body had been tempered and condensed like steel. Li Yundong ran all the way. When he was tired, he found a place to shelter himself from the wind and rain and sat down on the spot. After a short nap, he continued his journey in high spirits. When he was hungry, he would chew a few mouthfuls of highland barley cakes. When he was thirsty, he would drink a few large bottles of water by the river on the plateau and then drink to his heart's content. Go to see. 7 KOM. Rainbow ** literature _learning %super #speed. Update. The water on the plateau was different from that on the mainland. It was clear and transparent without pollution. Li Yundong drank it in a few mouthfuls and felt refreshed. After running like this for 10 days, Li Yundong finally arrived at the foot of the Himalayas. Li Yundong looked up and felt that the mountain in front of him was magnificent and towering into the clouds. He couldn't see the end of it at a glance, as if the top of the mountain went straight to the 9 clouds. Before he started climbing, Li Yundong couldn't help but feel fear in his heart. Can a human climb such a high mountain? Although there are records of climbers conquering the highest peaks in the world, these people all have professional climbing equipment. Can I climb this mountain covered with thick ice and snow alone? However, didn't I come here from thousands of miles away to challenge the roof of the world and borrow the power of heaven and earth to build my Zhuji phase? Li Yundong stood at the foot of the mountain for a while. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, the fear in his eyes suddenly disappeared, replaced by fanaticism and excitement. At the beginning, Li Yundong could still see the lush green vegetation at the foot of the mountain, but the higher he climbed, the shorter the grass. Gradually, there was only tenacious green moss growing on the rocks, and the green grass and shrubs had disappeared. Li Yundong looked down from above and saw that the ground was thick green, as if it was covered with a layer of green blanket. The river on the grassland was like a silver necklace running through the green blanket. Li Yundong estimated that he had climbed about 1 or 2 kilometers high. As Li Yundong continued to climb, frost began to form on the ground, and the journey became more arduous and difficult. Since he didn't have professional climbing shoes, he had to focus all his attention on the complicated frost under his feet. Every step he took was like walking on thin ice. After climbing for more than 2 kilometers, Li Yundong looked back and found that he was already in a silver world. There was ice and snow everywhere, and the whole world was wrapped in silver. The land under his feet had become very far away. The river, which had been like a silver necklace, had now become a silver filament. It was so small that if one didn't pay attention, it would be easy to ignore it. Li Yundong looked up and felt that the peak in front of him was still too high to reach. He didn't know which mountain he was climbing. The only thing he knew was that he had to climb up, and keep climbing up. Although there was a strong wind on the mountain at this time, and the cold wind was like a knife, Li Yundong was only wearing a thin shirt. He kept climbing in this world of ice and snow with difficulty. Every step he took seemed to take a lot of effort, and his body would sway slightly. But even though his climb seemed so difficult, Li Yundong still did not flinch or hesitate at all. In his opinion, wasn't life such a process of climbing a dangerous peak? Some people were afraid of such hardships, so they stayed at the foot of the mountain to enjoy the comfortable environment, but they missed a good opportunity to enjoy the infinite scenery. The more Li Yundong climbed up, the more bitter and strong the cold wind became. He had to spend a lot of jinqi to resist the cold of -10 degrees. Some people were born with strong yang qi, so they were less than ordinary people in winter, because the strong blood qi in their bodies was enough to help them resist the cold. Some people were particularly afraid of the cold, so they wrapped themselves tightly in winter because they lacked yang qi in their bodies, and their blood qi was not enough to help them resist the cold. Many times in autumn or even winter, there were many people on the street wearing backless clothes, midriff-bearing clothes, and short skirts, but most of them were young people because they were young, full of yang qi and strong blood qi. However, People in their 30s rarely wore such clothes, because their bodies had begun to go downhill. There was not enough yang qi in their bodies, and their blood qi was not strong. Li Yundong's body had been transformed by the Renyuan Jindan, and his internal organs had been constantly honed and tempered. Therefore, his blood qi was unbelievably vigorous. Although he was only wearing a thin shirt, his hands and feet didn't shiver in the freezing cold of -10 degrees Celsius. On the contrary, a faint layer of white qi was emitting from his body, which was the hot qi discharged from his body when the blood qi in his body was tumbling. Li Yundong climbed up the mountain range for about 2,000 meters. When he looked down again, he could no longer see the land nearby. At first glance, Li Yundong could only see a sea of clouds surrounding the mountain range, as if he was already in a fairyland. Li Yundong raised his head and looked into the distance. He saw the rolling mountains on the vast land. The top was covered with snow, and the bottom was lush green. It was like two worlds with distinct colors and levels. Li Yundong only felt that he was in this vast world, and his whole body was integrated with it. He seemed to be able to touch the sky with a stretch of his hand, and the earth seemed to be within his grasp with a stretch of his hand. No wonder the great man once said, "Infinite scenery lies in the dangerous peak." If I hadn't climbed such a dangerous peak, how would I have known that there would be such a magical and magnificent scenery in the world, and that people would have such lofty sentiments and lofty aspirations? Li Yundong sighed in his heart. He felt an incomparably powerful force emerge in his body. This force made him feel as if he was the only ruler between heaven and earth. It's not without reason that Zi Yuan asked me to come to such a place to Zhuji phase. Li Yundong only felt that the qi and blood in his chest were tumbling, and he couldn't help but want to roar. As soon as this idea emerged, Li Yundong felt that the 5 qi in his 5 internal organs were about to move, and the jinqi accumulated in the 3 dantians was also boiling, like a flood that was about to open the floodgates at any time. Li Yundong knew that this was a sign that he could start the Zhuji phase. Although he hadn't reached the top of the mountain, he still remembered something that Zi Yuan had said to him: "You don't have to reach the top. As long as the jinqi in your body responds, you can start the Zhuji phase." Li Yundong looked around. He knew that no one could disturb him when he was in the Zhuji phase. He thought to himself, no one will come to such a place, right? After thinking for a while, Li Yundong used his hands to dig a small hole with his back against the mountain. The hole was sunken so that he could hide in it, and he sat cross-legged in it. As soon as Li Yundong entered meditation, the jinqi in his body roared, as if a dam had been opened and an avalanche had occurred, /om/. Chapter 183. Go to watch net. He clearly remembered at the last time he had reached the Zhuji phase, Su Chan had once explained to him what it was all about. Watch net. 7ko/. But when he put aside everything and really entered the Zhuji phase, he found that when he really entered the Zhuji phase, the whole spirit space was dark and chaotic. He couldn't see anything, and even if he wanted to shout, he couldn't hear his own voice. In this Zhuji phase, Lu Chuan, Young He, and the others no longer appeared in Li Yundong's spirit space, because he had attracted heavenly thunder to kill Young He, which had completely vented the anger in his heart. Su Chan's departure also made him temporarily restrain his mind and enter the cultivation realm of the unity of body and mind, the unity of heaven and man. In such a state, Li Yundong's whole person fell into a state of ignorance, tastelessness, indifference, and indifference. The only thing he could do was still think. It was as if he was in a chaotic world, and he was the ancient god, Pan Gu, who was trapped in this chaotic world. Humans were born in their mother's womb, just like Pangu was trapped in the chaos. The first movement that a baby pursued freedom was to kick its legs. With this movement, it meant that the child had basically matured and couldn't wait to come into this world. Li Yundong suddenly felt that the Zhuji phase of a cultivator was like a baby in its mother's womb, struggling bitterly to get out of its mother's womb and come to this world. However, the struggle of a baby was an unconscious activity of life, while the foundation building of a cultivator was a conscious challenge of the laws of survival between heaven and earth. Li Yundong placed himself on a dangerous peak in a world of ice and snow. The extreme cold forced him to use a large amount of yang qi to resist the cold, and only a small part of his yang qi could be used to build the Zhuji phase. Although Li Yundong had trained the yuanyang qi in his body to be many times more vigorous than before, and he had tempered his jinqi to be as condensed as steel, he still felt extremely strenuous in such a dangerous environment. Li Yundong had been trapped in this chaotic world for a long time. He gradually felt that the world around him was slowly becoming colder. Even the sound of the cold wind outside was blowing in his ears, making him feel as if there was a terrible cold wind in this chaotic world. The chaotic world was getting colder and colder, and Li Yundong's hands and feet were also getting colder. Only the dantian in his lower abdomen seemed to have a flame that would not go out all year round, constantly burning and jumping. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He remembered what Su Chan had told him before. There's no need to wait for the winter solstice to practice kung fu. This little bit of yang fire was the purest and most essential yang qi in the human body. As long as this little bit of yang qi existed, a person's vitality would not be cut off. Watch net. There is heaven and earth in one's own universe. The heart is higher than the heavens, and the kidneys are higher than the earth. Breathing out the heart and sucking in the navel is the truth of breath regulation. Su Chan had read Lu Dongbin's cultivation poem when he was in the Zhuji phase. At this time, Li Yundong recalled that every word was clear and distinct. Li Yundong guarded this little bit of yang qi tightly, as if he was guarding a flickering oil lamp in the wild wind, or a small boat that could be overturned at any time in the stormy waves of the storm. In the midst of the raging waves, Li Yundong slowly entered the state of jinqi from the mortal state. The little bit of yuanyang qi in his body also expanded bit by bit, and the small flame also became more vigorous bit by bit. After an unknown period of time, Li Yundong suddenly found that the small flame had become a fist-sized fireball. No matter how strong the cold wind around him was, it could no longer affect the vigorous burning of the fireball. Then, the fireball continued to grow, burning toward the dantian in Li Yundong's chest. The qi of the 5 internal organs in Li Yundong's body was attracted by the fireball. The qi hidden deep in the 5 internal organs rushed toward the fireball, burning all the way along with the flame. This was a spark that could start a prairie fire. Wherever this ball of raging fire went, that place would become scorching hot, and the cold air from before would immediately be expelled. Before long, Li Yundong felt that his whole body had become extremely hot, and then the chaotic world had also become scorching and dry. This feeling made him feel suffocated, and he wished he could roar and smash the chaotic world into pieces. But Li Yundong clearly felt that his hands and feet were not listening to him. He was like a baby in his mother's womb, struggling desperately, wanting to go to a new world. The more Li Yundong struggled, the stronger and more majestic the power accumulated in his body. It was like a dam storing water, ready to burst at any time. After a long time, Li Yundong suddenly heard a crisp, pop sound in his ears. It sounded like a bubble that had swollen to the brim. Hongom in an instant, in this spirit space, all the senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste and perception suddenly returned to Li Yundong's body. He could control his hands and feet again. He suddenly jumped up and pushed hard with both hands. With a bang, the chaotic world broke apart. Watch net. Suddenly, a stream of clear qi rushed up to the top of Li Yundong's head, and a stream of turbid qi went straight to the lower dantian of his lower abdomen, as if heaven and earth had just been formed. But as soon as the chaotic world was split open by Li Yundong, he suddenly found that a rolling dark cloud had quickly gathered in his spirit space, covering the sky and the earth, and thunder and lightning were rolling in the clouds. With a loud rumble of thunder, a bolt of heavenly thunder heavily struck Li Yundong's body. At this moment, Li Yundong felt that he had lost all his senses again. The Jinqi in his body was suddenly condensed into a ball, and it returned to the state of a small flame. Li Yundong was shocked. He subconsciously wanted to avoid the terrible heavenly thunder, but then another bolt of lightning struck him. This bolt of lightning was so painful that the blood vessels in his body almost burst, and the breath in his body was almost cut off. But before Li Yundong could catch his breath, thunder rumbled in the sky, and the heavenly thunder fell wildly. The third, fourth, and fifth bolts of lightning struck down in the blink of an eye. The sky and the earth were densely filled with lightning dancing and thunder raging. Li Yundong felt that his whole body was about to be split apart and his soul was about to scatter. Although this spirit space was large, there was no place for him to hide. What should I do? Am I going to be killed here? Li Yundong thought with fear in his heart. I haven't succeeded in the Zhuji phase yet. Su Chan is still waiting for me. But at this moment, a sentence suddenly flashed through Li Yundong's mind. It was the sentence that Su Chan had once said to him, the way of cultivation is as difficult as ascending to heaven. There is great horror between life and death, between heaven and earth, and between reality and illusion. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly thought, all of this is an illusion. This is my own spirit space. Why am I afraid of this heavenly thunder that doesn't exist? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suddenly had the urge to resist and work hard. He shouted, so what if it's heavenly tribulation? So what if it's heavenly thunder? If you have the ability, come at me. Do you think I'm afraid? Li Yundong's shout shook the spirit space, and even the heavenly thunder in the sky couldn't suppress it. Li Yundong transformed into a god with 3 heads and 6 arms in the spirit space. Holding all kinds of magical items, he resisted the divine thunder all over the sky and roared again and again. Li Yundong had thought that this was actually just the great horror between reality and illusion. As long as he could defeat these delusions and illusions, he would be able to succeed in the Zhuji phase. But he had never expected that this was actually one of the 3 great horrors of cultivation, the great horror between heaven and earth. Cultivation was something that went against heaven and earth. Therefore, when cultivators were strong to a certain extent, heaven would send down heavenly thunder to destroy such strong cultivators, in order to achieve balance between heaven and earth. Meanwhile, the cultivators who succeeded in the Zhuji realm were constantly fighting against the heavens. Some people hid from the heavenly tribulations, some went through the tribulations, and some fought against the tribulations. However, without exception, all of them wanted to continue their cultivation and life, attempting to obtain the power to surpass the heavens. Why did cultivators like to live in the mountains and go to high places? The reason was revealed in one sentence. The higher you climb, the closer you are to heaven, and the more you can feel the power of heaven. Sometimes, cultivators could borrow this kind of power, but it was very dangerous. If they were not careful, they would backfire. This was like a person who wanted to go against heaven and do illegal things. But even if he did illegal things, he had to wander in front of the police station. If this wasn't arrogance, what was it? If they didn't catch him, who would they catch? Cultivators were like lawbreakers, and heaven was like the police station. In order to cultivate, Li Yundong had climbed so high, just like a lawbreaker wandering in front of the police station. If they didn't catch him, who would they catch? Therefore, the thunder tribulation that Li Yundong encountered in his spirit space was not completely an illusion of his sea of consciousness, but a strange phenomenon caused by the pressure of heaven on his sea of consciousness. Logically speaking, ordinary people would never put themselves in such a harsh and cold place to carry out the Zhuji phase like Li Yundong had done, let alone climb so high. But Si Yuan knew that Li Yundong's heavenly tribulation was imminent, and he would never be able to survive it without a trick. Therefore, she took the risk and let Li Yundong go to the most bitter place in the world to cultivate, but she didn't tell him clearly. Taking a trick meant that the risk was greater. If it had been someone else, they might have been doomed. However, Li Yundong accidentally did not feel afraid of the great horror between heaven and earth at all. Instead, he was full of fighting spirit, fighting with heaven and earth, and fighting with endless joy. Li Yundong was fighting fiercely with the heavenly thunder in his spirit space. Although his own deity was bombarded by countless heavenly thunder, the more it was bombarded, the more Li Yundong resisted. The more he resisted, the stronger he felt the strength in his body. Even the Yuanyang Jinqi in Li Yundong's body in the spirit space was undergoing the most critical transformation. But at this time, 3 figures appeared on the mountain, all wearing windproof goggles and thick winter clothes. They were holding nails and crutches for climbing in their hands, and they were also wearing thick anti-skid shoes. They were the 2 foreigners and a female tour guide Lu Xia, who Li Yundong had met on the way to climb the mountain. One of the foreigners had sharp eyes and saw that there was suddenly a little other color in the snowy world. He pointed at the place where Li Yundong was and shouted, "There seems to be someone there." Another foreigner was holding a handheld camera in his hand. While filming, he looked over and nodded. "Hey, keep your voice down. Just go over and take a look. Don't be too loud, or you'll cause an avalanche." The 3 of them came to the pit that Li Yundong had dug and took a look. They were shocked and said in unison, "It's him." The female tour guide Lu Xia saw that the man was covered with a layer of ice and snow. He closed his eyes and sat cross-legged. His hands were placed on his legs, his palms facing the sky, and his thumb and ring finger were gently pinched together. Lu Xia squatted down, took off her gloves, and put her hand in front of Li Yundong's nose to check his breath. She was shocked. She turned her head and said with a complicated expression, "He's dead." The 2 foreigners drew a cross on their chests at the same time. One of them whispered, "Oh my God! Why did he die in this place?" Another foreigner sighed and said, "Sometimes, the Orientals are very strange." Lu Xia stared blankly at Li Yundong, who was motionless. Suddenly, she felt very complicated in her heart. She sighed, but also felt a little happy. Who told you to show off? Now you want to see if you can show off again. But as soon as this thought came to her mind, she couldn't help smiling bitterly. I have no grudge against him. Why do I always hate this guy so much? Forget it. For the sake of our compatriot, let's take his body back. Thinking of this, Lu Xia couldn't help reaching out to Li Yundong, wanting to drag him out of the hole. /om/ Chapter 184. Go to watch net. Just as Lu Xia reached out to drag Li Yundong out of the cave, the foreigner beside her suddenly said, "Lu, what do you want to do?" Lu Xia stopped and looked back at him in confusion. "Of course I want to pull him out and bury him well. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. The foreigner said in an exaggerated voice, "Lu, do you want to climb the mountain with a corpse? Let's talk about it when we get down the mountain." Another foreigner also nodded and said, "Yes, and I think they might have come to this place on purpose, just like Islam went to Jerusalem. Perhaps dying here is his final destination. Don't disturb him." Lu Xia hesitated for a moment, but finally straightened up, put on her gloves again, and said, "Then let's continue climbing." Li Yundong, who was in the middle of the Zhuji phase, suddenly didn't know that he had escaped a disaster. If Lu Xia pulled him out, it would be equivalent to forcibly destroying his Zhuji phase, and he would never be able to cultivate again in this life. At this time, the Jinqi in Li Yundong's body was like a whirlpool that kept rotating. The main part was gathered in the lower dantian of his lower abdomen, and the qi from the 5 internal organs was like heavenly thunder, violently bombarding the Jinqi in the lower dantian of his lower abdomen. This mass of Jinqi was constantly compressed and condensed by the bombardment. At first it was the size of a watermelon, but it was slowly compressed to the size of a fist, and then it was compressed to a small ball the size of a pigeon's egg. Slowly, the mass of qi, which had been bombarded countless times, was compressed into a small ball the size of a thumb, which was constantly rotating and emitting red light. This was the foundation-building Niden that countless outer sect cultivators dreamed of. There were many cultivation sects in the world, but all of them used the primordial yang fire in their bodies to refine their Niden. However, Li Yundong was the only one who used the power of heaven and earth to refine his body and the power of heavenly thunder to refine his primordial yang. In other words, ordinary cultivators used fire to refine their Niden, but Li Yundong used thunder to refine his Niden. Moreover, in the Tao of the world, lightning was the most exalted. It transcended the 5 elements and stood above all living beings. As soon as this Niden was refined, Li Yundong suddenly felt as if he had endless power in the spirit space. He controlled the 3-headed and 6-armed god in his body and suddenly threw the powerful magical weapon in his hand into the sky. His 6 arms pinched 3 Mahamudra at the same time, which were the Mahavirokana Mahamudra that could destroy all darkness and ignorance. It was the womb realm's mandala light-gathering Buddha top handprint that could break through all obstacles. It was the Vajrasamaya giant palm print that could destroy all demons and devils. As soon as the 3 big handprints were made, the gods in Li Yunyang's spirit space suddenly burst out with dazzling golden light, and 3 colorful halos appeared behind their heads, like Vajra descending to the world and Buddha appearing. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. The god let out a loud roar, and one of his vertical pupils suddenly opened. Divine light shot out from his eyes, along with the magic treasures thrown into the sky, and the 3 palm prints shot into the sky. With a loud bang, all the dark clouds in the sky were shattered by the 3 consecutive blows, and the heavenly thunder disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. The world and the spirit space suddenly became quiet, leaving only Li Yundong's true god standing upright, looking down at the world with disdain and insufferably arrogant. At this time, Li Yundong's physical body in the spirit space also completed the final Zhuji phase. His eyelids suddenly moved, and the genuine qi in his body was continuously released from the Niden, which was constantly rotating. A strong and hot flow instantly spread through his body, making him restless. When the qi reached the Huagai acupoint on his chest, Li Yundong couldn't help it anymore. He suddenly opened his eyes and jumped up. A stream of qi broke through the Huagai acupoint and went straight to the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head. As soon as he raised his head, a long roar like a dragon and a tiger suddenly burst out from his chest. Ah! Although this long roar was not as continuous as the last time when Li Yundong had succeeded in qi refining, the sound was condensed and did not disperse. The sound line was like a steel cable, sending it far away. It could still be heard clearly even when it was more than 10 miles away. Li Yundong's long roar lasted for more than 2 minutes. When he stopped, the surging qi in his body calmed down again and slowly flowed to the Niden in his dantian. Li Yundong tried to run the Jinqi in his body. He found that the most obvious change was that the Niden in the dantian under his lower abdomen was like a core. The qi in his whole body was surrounding this Niden, and it was always rushing toward it, causing it to keep rotating. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. Colorful asterisk rainbow caret asterisk when underscore _% super hashtag speed. In the process of this constant rotation, this Niden kept releasing Jinqi, which rushed to every part of his body along with the Jinqi in his body. It was endless and continuous. Before the Zhuji phase, the aura of the human body was like a group of ownerless farmers. They could go anywhere and live anywhere. When people were in a fighting state, they seemed to have received a unified order and began to pick up weapons and transform into soldiers. But once the war was over, they immediately went back to where they came from and became farmers again. But after people reached the Zhuji phase, cultivators had Niden, which was like a regular army stationed in their bodies all year round, always surrounding and protecting the host, always maintaining a fighting state, and resisting all kinds of external invasions. Farmers lacked autonomy. They could be robbed and occupied. If the owner changed, nothing would happen to them. Therefore, before Li Yundong reached the Zhuji phase, if Su Chan had sex with him, the aura in his body would be unconsciously attracted by Su Chan's aura and spontaneously run into Su Chan's body. In this way, Li Yundong would naturally be empty, and he wouldn't be able to escape the fate of death. However, the regular army had a strong sense of vigilance and danger. They huddled together tightly and were always on guard against external attacks. No one could think of robbing or invading them. They could only be destroyed, not captured. Li Yundong succeeded in the Zhuji phase. After a long roar, he felt like his whole body was filled with endless power. This kind of power did not refer to the strength of his muscles and body, but his internal organs, meridians, blood vessels, and even every strand of his hair was full of vitality. He had never experienced this kind of power before. He felt that his perception was much stronger than before. He could even clearly feel the pressure from the sky above his head, as if there was a pair of cold and majestic eyes in the sky watching him all the time. This feeling made Li Yundong suddenly feel like an official wanted criminal, who would be caught by the heavens at any time, the arrival of heaven's retribution. As soon as this feeling appeared in Li Yundong's heart, he smiled strangely, but he soon heard a dull rumble coming from the distance above his head, as if thunderclouds were rolling, and heaven's retribution was imminent. Li Yundong was suddenly shocked. No way. Will heaven's retribution come so fast? He looked up and was immediately dumbfounded. The mountain above his head was rumbling with snow rolling, and the snowflakes were splashing like stormy waves. Damn, an avalanche. Don't tell me it's because of my shout just now. Li Yundong suddenly remembered a movie he had seen before, East Becomes West. In it, Wang Chongyang shouted arrogantly after coming out of cultivation, "I'm already invincible in the world." As a result, a shoe immediately fell from the sky and crushed him to death. Li Yundong's expression became very interesting in an instant. He couldn't help but feel a little crazy. He pointed at the sky and cursed, F***ck, God, I've just reached the Zhuji phase. I'm not invincible in the world yet. I just shouted. You don't have to play with me like this, do you? Li Yundong turned around and was about to run, but suddenly, 3 panicked figures ran quickly not far away. They were the 2 foreigners and the female tour guide, Lu Xia. The 2 foreigners had never expected that there would be an avalanche when they were climbing the mountain. They were so scared that they peed their pants and subconsciously ran back. However, how could human legs run faster than the speed of an avalanche? While the female tour guide, Lu Xia, was running away in a hurry, she suddenly saw a figure out of the corner of her eye. She turned her head and saw Li Yundong standing not far away, staring blankly at the avalanche on the top of the mountain. Lu Xia immediately stopped and laughed bitterly. It's over. I'm dead this time. I actually saw a phantom. The dead actually came back to life again. Alas, this is retribution. I shouldn't have fought with him in the first place. She stopped. Seeing that Lu Xia had stopped, the 2 foreigners next to her also stopped subconsciously. They followed Lu Xia's gaze and were also shocked. God, isn't he dead? As soon as they stopped, the avalanche on the top of the mountain hit them in the blink of an eye. At first, the avalanche was far away like the waves on the sea, but at this time, it had already reached their heads. The rumbling sound suppressed all the sounds in the world. They opened their mouths and shouted, but their voices were instantly buried. At this time, Li Yundong also noticed them, and his heart suddenly shook. Li Yundong knew that this avalanche was caused by him. He could escape with his strong skills, but what about these guys who were climbing the mountain? Wouldn't it be a tragedy? Li Yundong hesitated for a moment. Should I leave them alone, turn around and run away, or save them? But what if I save them? How can I save them? Can I save them? I don't want to lose myself as soon as I reach the Zhuji phase. But on second thought, Li Yundong wondered why he had cultivated. When he saw injustice on the road, he could still pull out a knife to help, regardless of his own safety. Why did he become hesitant after he succeeded in reaching the Zhuji phase and became stronger? What's more, he was the one who had caused this. Li Yundong took a deep breath, and without any hesitation in his heart, the Niden in his lower abdomen began to roll quickly like a hot fireball, constantly gushing out the purest and most condensed Jindan's primordial qi. With a stomp of his feet, he instantly appeared in front of the three people. His 5 fingers flew, his hands were tied, his 2 middle fingers were erected, and his thumbs were crossed like lotus leaves. It was the fixed fundamental mudra. Li Yundong's eyes widened and he let out a low shout, bang. Then, the fixed fundamental mudra in his hand was pushed up. In an instant it was as if a golden qi wall had suddenly been pushed out in front of Li Yundong, forcibly blocking the fierce avalanche less than 2 meters in front of him. The rolling snow was suddenly blocked in one place, but the avalanche on both sides roared down, passing by the 2 foreigners and Lu Xia like a waterfall. The 2 foreigners only saw Li Yundong push with both hands, and the avalanche was forcibly blocked into a wall, and it was getting higher and higher. The scene was even more exaggerated than a Hollywood stunt. They couldn't help but widen their eyes, and their scalps went numb with shock. Who the hell is this guy, /om/? Chapter 185. Go to watch net. Jack and Ruby were 2 mountaineering enthusiasts. Of course, they knew that when climbing such a snowy mountain, they were most afraid of encountering an avalanche. Generally, in such a situation, unless rescue was organized immediately, they would definitely die. Watch net. However, the probability of an avalanche was very low. It was unlikely that they would encounter one, but they never expected that they would actually encounter one. Furthermore, this avalanche was man-made. However, something even more ridiculous than the avalanche happened. There was actually someone who forcefully blocked the natural might of the avalanche with his own physical strength. The 3 of them were dumbfounded. Before they could react, Li Yundong jumped more than 10 meters away. After a few more jumps, he disappeared from their line of sight. But not long after, Li Yundong jumped back a few times and took a rectangular object that was nearly the height of a person from the snow cave where he had been staying. He carried it on his back, and then he jumped a few more times and left in an instant. It was not until a long time after Li Yundong had left that the 3 of them reacted. Jesus Christ, isn't this too amazing? Jack the foreigner said while stuttering. The foreigner, Ruby, who was holding the camera with his body still stiff, also stuttered, Lu, I know your China is a very magical place, but this is too exaggerated. As he spoke, his voice involuntarily became a little louder. Immediately, a few cracks appeared on the artificial snow wall in front of him. Jack and Lu Xia immediately rushed over and covered his mouth. Lu Xia lowered her voice and said, if you have anything to say, let's talk after we get down the mountain. The foreigner, Jack, nodded his head like a chicken pecking at rice. For a moment, the 3 hoodlums didn't dare to take another breath. They quietly descended the mountain like thieves. After Li Yundong went down the mountain first, he ran wildly with a guilty conscience. It was not until he was far away from the mountain that he took a breath and stopped. Watch net. Rainbow ** literature _learning% super #speed. Update. He wandered alone on the Qinghai, Tibetan plateau. Suddenly, he succeeded in building his foundation, but he did not know what to do next. It was as if he was in the vast wilderness and did not know where to go. At this time, Li Yundong suddenly thought of Zi Yuan. Didn't she say that when he succeeded in the Zhuji phase, she would automatically come to find him? Carrying the fan of 7 treasures on his back, Li Yundong looked around blankly. Just as he was in a daze, he suddenly felt a needle-like feeling on his back, as if someone was hiding in the dark and coveting him. He turned his head abruptly and saw a Land Rover parked on the side of the road not far away. A young man and a young woman were sitting in the car. It was the young man and woman who had been peeping at him when he had met Meiduo and Changbajila. The woman was dressed fashionably and coquettishly. She was wearing a pair of purple sunglasses. At first glance, her waterfall-like black hair and beautiful oval face were very attractive. The man was wearing an open-sleeved pink long-sleeved shirt and a pair of sunglasses that Jackie Chan loved the most. He looked very cool. When the man saw Li Yundong looking at him, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He turned his head and whispered a few words in the ear of the woman next to him. The woman smiled charmingly at the man, kissed him gently on the face, and then put her arms around the man's neck. The two of them got out of the car as if they were joined together. The man put his arms around the coquettish woman's waist and slowly walked toward Li Yundong. As he walked, he tilted his head and looked at Li Yundong. When he was 10 meters away from Li Yundong, he took off his sunglasses, revealing a pair of rather frivolous eyes. When his eyes fell on the back of the fan of 7 treasures behind Li Yundong, there was a strong sense of greed and envy in his eyes. Li Yundong was secretly vigilant. He held his breath and stared at the man in front of him without saying a word. He was as silent as a majestic mountain. The coquettish woman next to the man also looked at Li Yundong curiously, and from time to time, there was a coquettish and seductive look in her eyes. "I'm Wu Hao from the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua." Wu Hao smiled frivolously, let go of the woman's waist, and cupped his hands. The woman next to him also giggled and said with a coquettish face, "I'm LV Fengping from the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua. Go to see the net. 7 K.O.M. Li Yundong calmly cupped his hands and returned the salute. "Nice to meet you. What can I do for you too?" Wu Hao held a pair of sunglasses in one hand and knocked them on the palm of his other hand. His body was crooked and slanted. He did not look like a cultivator at all, but more like a hooligan. He said, "It's nothing. I just heard a long roar coming from afar. My partner, LV Fengping, and I heard the sound and knew that someone had succeeded in the Zhuji phase here, so we came to take a look. I didn't expect to meet an acquaintance on the way." Li Yundong said lightly, "So that's how it is. It's really a coincidence. Can I go now?" Seeing that Li Yundong didn't want to see him, Wu Hao was secretly unhappy, but he suppressed his unhappiness and said, "Don't be in such a hurry to leave. I have a deal to make with you. Are you interested?" "I'm not interested," Li Yundong said flatly without hesitation. This sentence made Wu Hao choke. He said angrily, "I haven't said anything yet, and you don't know what it is. Why did you refuse? That's not very polite, is it?" Li Yundong snorted coldly, opened his hands, and looked himself up and down. "I am alone in the world. Except for a worldly thing, there is nothing that can attract your attention, unless..." Li Yundong glanced at the coquettish woman next to Wu Hao, and a sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Unless you want to help the woman next to you rape me?" Wu Hao's face suddenly darkened, but LV Fengping, who was next to him, giggled. Her voice was dissolute, and she didn't care at all. Instead, there was a hint of provocation in her eyes. Wu Hao stared at Li Yundong for a while with a gloomy face, but after a while, he relaxed his expression and said with a smile, "I won't argue with you. I just want to ask you, will you sell the fan of 7 treasures behind you?" Li Yundong saw that the man had seen through the origin of the treasure fan behind him as soon as he opened his mouth. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart and thought to himself, how did he know? Li Yundong shouted resolutely, "No." Wu Hao was unwilling to give up. "I'll pay 5 million for your fan of 7 treasures. Will you sell it?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he sucked in a breath of cold air. 5 million. 5 million meant that a person could basically solve the most difficult problems of housing and livelihood in this life. He could buy 2 or 3 houses and live a comfortable life as a landlord. This was the kind of life that Li Yundong had longed for the most in the past. However, Li Yundong knew that he had changed. It was impossible for him to go back to the situation where he could eat his fill and worry about his family. Moreover, this was a gift from Su Chan. To him, it was a priceless treasure. How could he sell it? Li Yundong snorted coldly. 5 million? I won't sell it even for 50 million. Wu Hao frowned, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. But he still patiently said, fellow Taoist, I see that you are a kindred spirit. That's why I'm willing to discuss it with you. If you think that my price is too low, why don't you name a price? Everything is negotiable. If 5 million won't do, then what about 10 million? What, not even 10 million? Then 20 million, I can't go any higher. Li Yundong saw that Wu Hao had raised the price to 20 million in the blink of an eye, and he sneered. Don't waste your time. I will never sell this fan of 7 treasures. As soon as he finished speaking, Wu Hao hugged LV Fengping and laughed wildly. I said it could be the fan of 7 treasures, didn't I? You still don't believe me. What do you think? Let me try it out. LV Fengping smiled coquettishly. Yes, yes, you are still the best, you devil. Wu Hao's face, which had been suppressing his anger, became arrogant and domineering. He raised his chin, sneered and said, Boy, you are too inexperienced to fight with me. Let me tell you, if you know what's good for you, obediently sell this fan of 7 treasures to me, and I will still give you 5 million. Otherwise, humph. Li Yundong was born arrogant. He could be persuaded by reason but not cowed by force. Others were arrogant, but he was even more arrogant than them. He smiled coldly and said, Otherwise what? Wu Hao sneered. Otherwise, it will be a pity for your cultivation skills, which have just reached the Zhuji phase. You will die here as soon as you step on the road of cultivation. Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and was about to speak, but he saw LV Fengping flirtatiously winking at Li Yundong and saying coquettishly, Oh, little brother, why do you have to fight for such a dead thing? My devil is very fierce when he gets angry, and you have just reached the Zhuji phase, so you are no match for him. You see, we are not going to rob you of your treasures. Aren't we talking about the price with you? 5 million is too little. He's such a stingy person. How about 10 million? How about it? 10 million isn't a small amount, is it? It's better to squash enmity than keep it alive. Wu Hao, who was standing to one side, pinched LV Fengping's breasts hard and said with a smile, You bitch, you are actually speaking for an outsider. I think you have taken a fancy to him. You really want to rape him, don't you? LV Fengping wriggled in Wu Hao's arms and said coquettishly, You devil, how dare you say that to me? Be careful, I will bite off your ugly thing when we get back. Wu Hao snorted and said, If you want to rape me, then just do it. I don't mind. As he said this, he looked at Li Yundong frivolously and said, Hey, 10 million, plus this woman, how about that? Is that enough sincerity? I see that you are still a virgin. After you have a taste of her kung fu, you will know what the most despicable thing in the world is. Li Yundong looked at Wu Hao and LV Fengping's ugly behavior coldly and felt disgusted in his heart. He snorted coldly and said, Are you finished? If you are, then get out of here. Don't stand here and dirty my eyes and ears. You think shamelessness is fun? Bah! After that, he spat heavily on the ground. Wu Hao suddenly became furious, and his face twisted. He pointed at Li Yundong and shouted, Little bastard, I gave you face, but you don't want it. I will tell you again, hand over the treasured fan, and I will spare your life, /om/. Chapter 186. Go to watch net. After Wu Hao shouted, Li Yundong was still unmoved. He looked at the man and woman in front of him coldly and suddenly sneered. Why are you talking so much nonsense? He patted the fan of 7 treasures behind him and said, The thing is here. Come and get it if you have the ability. If you don't have the ability, get out of here. Don't talk nonsense here. Can you kill me with words? Li Yundong's words made Wu Hao so angry that his face turned purple. With a loud shout, he swung his arm, and 5 red balls rolled out of his long sleeve. The balls were surrounded by a blood-red light, as if thick blood was lingering around them. From a distance, Li Yundong could smell the smell of blood blowing in his face. Go to watch net. 7K/Li Yundong suddenly froze. He knew that this must be his opponent's powerful magical weapon, but he didn't know what it was used for and how he could resist it. Li Yundong knew that although the other party wanted to take the treasure and was very arrogant, they were right about one thing. He had just reached the Zhuji phase, so he didn't know if he could beat them. Li Yundong took a deep breath, and the Niden in his lower abdomen began to spin wildly, ready to burst out the surging Jindan's qi at any time. Wu Hao laughed grimly. He held the 5 red blood beads in the air with one hand, pointed at Li Yundong with the other, and said, "I'll ask you one last time. If you know what's good for you, hurry up and hand over the fan of 7 treasures. Otherwise, under my 5 yang blood beads, I promise that even your bones will be turned into ashes." Li Yundong stared at Wu Hao coldly, then glanced at LV Fengping out of the corner of his eye. The woman didn't take out her powerful magical weapon. Her eyes were flashing as she watched the situation on the field. She had one hand on her waist and the other behind her back, as if she would pull out some powerful magical weapon at any time. 1 against 2 is already a disadvantage, not to mention that the other party's cultivation may be higher than mine. Li Yundong thought quickly and secretly made up his mind. No, I must make the first move. Li Yundong pretended to be shocked and frightened as he looked at the 5 yang blood pearl floating in the palm of the other party. He said in a trembling voice, "What is this thing? Why is it so scary?" Wu Hao said proudly, "Humph, you have good eyes. Let me tell you, the origin of this magic treasure of mine will scare you to death. It." Before Wu Hao could finish his words, Li Yundong suddenly opened his eyes, which were bursting with divine light. He suddenly stamped his feet, and his feet touched the ground. His body was like a violent wave, and he rushed toward Wu Hao. Watch net. 7KOM. Rainbow ** literature _learning% super #speed. Update. Li Yundong's body had been reconstructed by the Jindan, and his physical strength was even stronger than that of many people who had entered the Tao through martial arts. In addition, after a month of polishing, he had become even more powerful. When he broke out, it was as if the whole turf under his feet was going to be lifted up. His figure was as mighty as a wave, and his strength was like a flood. Wu Hao had never expected that Li Yundong would attack without warning, and that he would attack so fiercely. Although he was an inner disciple of Mount Wuhua, he had been soaked in medicinal water and fed with elixirs by his master since he was a child. He had reached the 5th level of Shintong at a young age, but he had taken the path of yin-yang dual cultivation of the Eastern Taoist sect. The Niden in his body had been obtained through sexual dual cultivation with LV Fengping. Although such a Niden was easier to cultivate and faster, after all, it could not be compared with the Niden that ordinary cultivators had refined in hard cultivation, let alone the Niden that Li Yundong had tempered with the divine power of heavenly thunder. Such a Niden, which had been cultivated through sexual dual cultivation, was often contemptuously called a fake Niden by cultivators of other sects. When encountering a strong person, it would be defeated with one blow. It was easy for Wu Hao to get his Niden, and it was also easy for him to get his Kung Fu. Moreover, most of his Kung Fu was Taoist magic, so he had never learned any close combat skills. Seeing that Li Yundong had rushed in front of him in the blink of an eye, Wu Hao suddenly rose up, turned his hand, and slapped down on the top of his head. This palm wind was fierce. If it hit, the top of his head would definitely be broken, and he would die miserably on the spot. Before cultivators had cultivated to the Jinshan phase, they would still die if their vital parts were hit by an ordinary person, let alone a cultivator with amazing divine power like Li Yundong. Wu Hao was so scared that his hair stood on end. He let out a strange cry and retreated like crazy. As he retreated, he screamed at LV Fengping, "What the F***ck are you doing there? Hurry up and do it." Before LV Fengping could come to her senses, Li Yundong had stuck to Wu Hao like a maggot attached to a bone. Wu Hao retreated quickly, but Li Yundong chased him even faster. Li Yundong only chased after him for 3 steps before he caught up with Wu Hao again. His 5 fingers were like hooks, pinching Wu Hao's neck. Go to see net. 7 KO-Wu Hao was terrified. Because the attack range of the 5 yang blood bead in his hand was too large, he didn't dare to release it for fear of hurting himself. Li Yundong grabbed his neck and lifted him up like a chicken. At this time, LV Fengping screamed and pulled out a dark red whip from behind her. She shouted in panic, "Let him go." Li Yundong sneered and said, "Let him go. If I let him go, will you let me go?" Wu Hao felt as if his neck had been tightly gripped by an iron clamp, and he couldn't even breathe. His face suddenly turned purple, and he said with difficulty, "Shameless, shameless, how dare you sneak attack me?" Li Yundong glanced at him coldly and didn't want to talk nonsense with him. He asked, "Do you want to live or die?" Wu Hao snorted, and his eyes kept rolling in his eye sockets, full of resentment. However, LV Fengping said anxiously, "Put him down. We can talk about it." Although both of them were cultivators who had cultivated to the Shintong realm, they were caught off guard when they suddenly encountered an unreasonable cultivator like Li Yundong, who fought hand-to-hand as soon as he came up. Seeing that Wu Hao had been restrained in the blink of an eye, LV Fengping suddenly became cautious. After all, no matter how fast the magic was, it was not as fast as the speed of 5 fingers pinching. Li Yundong glanced at LV Fengping coldly and said, "What do you have to say? If I let him go, will you leave obediently?" LV Fengping's previous coquettishness was gone. She took a deep breath, and the anxiety on her face gradually disappeared. She said seriously, "If we want to blame someone, we can only blame ourselves for being wrong. We thought that you were a cultivator who had just reached the Zhuji phase and had no Shintong or Dharma power. That's why we were greedy. If you are willing to let him go, we will leave right now. There will be no hesitation." Li Yundong narrowed his eyes and glanced sharply at LV Fengping's face. Seeing that her expression did not seem to be fake, he turned to Wu Hao and said coldly, "What about you?" Seeing that Li Yundong had the intention to let him go, Wu Hao also took a deep breath in a low voice and said, "I was blind and offended, Jinren. Please forgive me." Although Li Yundong had already set foot in the cultivation world, he was not a homicidal maniac after all. He had not expected to kill these 2 people here. Seeing that the other side had admitted defeat, he loosened his 5 fingers and shouted, "Get out of here." Wu Hao's neck was suddenly released, and he suddenly felt as if he had returned to heaven from hell. He bent down, took 2 deep breaths, and then staggered 2 steps. When he was a certain distance away from Li Yundong, he turned his head and looked at him. Suddenly, a trace of hatred flashed in his eyes. Seeing the killing intent in his eyes, Li Yundong immediately glared at him, and his eyes burst with divine light. His appearance was really murderous and extremely frightening. Although Wu Hao had Niden, his will was not firm. Being stared at by Li Yundong, he suddenly trembled with fear. He quickly turned his head, not daring to look at Li Yundong again, and turned to run toward LV Fengping. LV Fengping supported the embarrassed Wu Hao. She looked at Li Yundong, who had turned away with a cold snort and a complicated look in her eyes. She said in a low voice, "Forget it, we admit defeat this time. Let's go." Wu Hao looked at Li Yundong's back coldly, gritted his teeth, and said, "No, it was just a sneak attack. His dermic powers are not higher than the 2 of us. Besides, you can bear such a great shame, but I can't." After saying that, he raised the 5 dark red 5 yang blood beads in his hand and pointed them at Li Yundong's back. He shouted, "Go!" With a swoosh, a blood-red 5 yang blood bead suddenly broke through the air and rushed toward Li Yundong. Although Li Yundong's back was facing Wu Hao and the others, he suddenly felt a sharp pain on his back. He was shocked, and before he could react, he was hit hard on his back. With a bang, the 5 yang blood bead turned into a flame in the blink of an eye. Countless ghosts jumped out of the flame and swallowed Li Yundong in an instant. Wu Hao let out a wild laugh. "Who asked you to be so arrogant? Who asked you to be so ruthless? In the end, you still obediently got burned by my 5 sun blood pearl. Not only can my 5 yang blood flower bead burn your flesh, but the vengeful spirits within it can also devour your soul. Enjoy it." LV Fengping also giggled and said, "It's a pity that the fan of 7 treasures will be burned to ashes in a while." But as soon as her voice fell, she suddenly heard a loud shout from the flame, and a gust of wind blew. Although Li Yundong was hit in the back, the 5 yang blood bead happened to hit the fan of 7 treasures. The fan of 7 treasures was made of black iron and could only be refined by Samadhi true fire for 49 days. In addition, its whole body was engraved with the Vajra Sutra, so its Buddhist power was amazing, and it was dignified and solemn. The thick chi of blood corpses and ghosts emitted by the 5 yang blood bead could not invade it at all. Li Yundong endured the pain of being burned by the flames around him. He grabbed the iron fan with a backhand, twisted his waist, and the iron fan opened with a clang and fanned with all his might. This fanning seemed to have sucked out the air around him in an instant, and the flames became much smaller with a whoosh. The solemn Vajra characters on the leaves of the fan of 7 treasures looked like a layer of golden Buddha wherever they passed. The ghosts were so frightened that they screamed and fled in all directions, not daring to get close to Li Yundong at all. Li Yundong spun the fan several times in a row, and the fan of 7 treasures in his hand turned like a wheel. His whole body was shrouded in a layer of black light. In the blink of an eye, the flames were fanned out by him, and the ghosts were also expelled without a trace. Wu Hao and LV Fengping were stunned and speechless for a moment. They had never thought that the 5 yang blood bead, which was extremely powerful and domineering in their eyes, would be destroyed by a boy who had just reached the Zhuji phase. After Li Yundong put out the fire and drove away the ghosts, he rushed toward Wu Hao and LV Fengping angrily. With a loud roar, he said with a murderous look, "You're courting death, /OM/." Chapter 187. Go to watch net. The magical item he was most proud of had been easily broken. Wu Hao panicked for a moment. He couldn't help but take a few steps back, as if he wanted to turn around and run away. He didn't dare to fight with Li Yundong again. Go to watch net. However, LV Fengping, who looked very coquettish, had a bit of backbone. She gritted her teeth and swung the dark red whip in her hand. With a swish, it was like a poisonous snake, aiming at Li Yundong's eyes. Li Yundong didn't even look at it. Relying on the domineering fan of 7 treasures in his hand, he shook his wrist, and the fan of 7 treasures suddenly twisted the whip like a big iron pillar. Then he lowered his waist, exerted his strength with both hands, and shouted, "Let go." LV Fengping only felt a terrifying strange force. The whip in her hand was violently pulled out and was about to fall out of her hand in an instant. She was shocked and horrified, but this was her magical item. How could she let go and let others take it away so easily? LV Fengping didn't let go. With a shout, the tip of the whip in her hand suddenly turned into a dark red snake head, biting towards Li Yundong's wrist. If Li Yundong was bitten, he would be poisoned and die within 3 seconds. Li Yundong snorted, shook his wrist, and immediately let go of the fan of 7 treasures. The snake head that the whip had turned into also bit nothing. However, the force of Li Yundong's wrist shake violently threw LV Fengping up with the whip, and she fell to the ground with a bang. When Li Yundong took the fan of 7 treasures again, he happened to be at the other end of the fan, avoiding the threat of the whip head. He roared and smashed the tail of the fan toward LV Fengping's head, who was lying on the ground. The fan of 7 treasures weighed more than 50 kilograms, and the tail was like an iron rod as thick as an arm. If it hit LV Fengping, her head would definitely burst and she would die on the spot. This made Wu Hao and LV Fengping scream at the same time. "Stop!" Wu Hao shouted hoarsely. At this time, Li Yundong was angry, and with the lesson just now, he was unwilling to show mercy. He laughed grimly in his heart, and the fan of 7 treasures in his hand did not hesitate at all. Instead, it became faster and faster, and he slashed down hard. Just as the treasured fan was about to hit LV Fengping's head, a hand suddenly appeared and caught Li Yunyang's iron fan. The person who had suddenly intervened made Li Yundong stunned. He took a closer look and saw that the man was wearing a dark yellow robe and a red cassock, revealing a strong and muscular arm. He was dressed like a lama. Watch net. This person was Dorji Tenzin, who had been following Li Yunyang all the way. After blocking Li Yundong's iron fan, Dorji Tenzin shook his hand and threw Li Yundong's iron fan away. Then, he put his palms together, bowed, and said in a somewhat stiff Chinese voice, "Namo Amitabha, this is the holy land of Tibetan Buddhism. How can we kill under the nose of Buddha?" Seeing that the monk had blocked Li Yundong's fierce attack as soon as he appeared, Wu Hao's eyes lit up. He rolled his eyes and immediately cried out before Li Yundong could, "Master, it's great that you came. You have to uphold justice for us." Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and glanced at him sharply. "Oh. What happened?" Wu Hao was shameless. He knelt down in front of Dorji Tenzin and cried and shouted, "We were tourists who came here to travel. We met this gangster on the way. He saw that my wife was beautiful and wanted to molest her. Although we have practiced some kung fu, we are still no match for this guy. Look at how my wife has been bullied by him." Dorji Tenzin turned his head and saw that LV Fengping's hair was messy and she was sitting on the ground in horror, as if she had just been ravaged. LV Fengping also came to her senses and understood Wu Hao's intention. She said with a sad face, crying, "Master, thank you for saving me. Otherwise, I would have died in the hands of this villain." Li Yundong looked coldly at the 2 guys who were putting the blame on him. He was so angry that he burst out laughing. Watch net. 7 KOM. As a Buddhist disciple, Dorji Tenzin had been chosen as the guardian Vichara since he was a child, so his sense of justice was extremely strong. He suddenly became furious and raised his head to shout at Li Yunyang, "I came here on the order of the abbot to ask you to return the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra. I wanted to persuade you with kind words, but I didn't expect you to be such a shameless villain. I, Dorji Tenzin, have no choice but to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and subdue the demons today." Li Yundong sneered and said, "It sounds so nice. What, do you want to fight 3 against 1? Wu Hao was overjoyed. He hurriedly urged, "Master, you don't need to talk about Jianghu morality when dealing with this kind of villain. My wife and I also know a little kung fu. We can help a little." Li Yundong sneered. However, Dorji Tenzin's face turned serious and he said in a deep voice, "No, you 2 leave quickly. As the guardian of the sect, I naturally have to eradicate this kind of evil demon." Wu Hao smiled apologetically and said, "Master, you are really noble and unquestionable, but this villain is not so easy to deal with. Dorji Tenzin had grown up in the temple all year round. Although he was honest and simple, he was not pedantic. When he saw that Wu Hao's eyebrows were full of frivolity and LV Fengping's face was obviously coquettish, he subconsciously felt a little disgusted with the 2 of them. He immediately shouted rudely, "There's no need to say anything more. I, Dorji Tenzin, am not someone who bullies others and fights with more people." Wu Hao's face suddenly changed when he was shouted at by Dorji Tenzin. He took 2 steps back in embarrassment and stared at Dorji Tenzin's back. His eyes were gloomy and he sneered in his heart, this stupid monk, who hasn't even reached the Zhuji phase, wants to fight with this guy. Isn't he courting death? He winked at LV Fengping beside him, but LV Fengping pulled Wu Hao's sleeve and said in a very low voice, "Forget it, we'll admit defeat this time. This person is not easy to deal with." Wu Hao also said in a low voice, "What nonsense are you talking about? I was too proud just now. I don't believe that I can't kill this guy after I use all the blood beads of the 4 departments and 5 sons." LV Fengping bit her lip and said worriedly, "You used all 4 beads. How much effort did we put in to refine these 5 blood beads last time?" Wu Hao snorted and looked greedily at the fan of 7 treasures in Li Yunyang's hand. He said, "As long as we can get the fan of 7 treasures, these 4 blood beads are nothing. You saw it just now. This guy is already so powerful without knowing how to use this magic item. How powerful will he be after he recognizes him as his master?" There was still a trace of worry in LV Fengping's eyes. "But I always feel that it's very dangerous." Wu Hao looked at her unhappily and said, "Nonsense, how can it not be dangerous to kill people and take their treasures? What can you do if you are so wishy-washy? Later, you will support me from the side. When this stupid monk makes a move, we will immediately take action and kill the monk as well." LV Fengping was shocked. "You want to kill this monk as well? Aren't you afraid of offending the esoteric sect? Most of the Lama sect's disciples cultivated secret methods, so they were also called esoteric sect in the cultivation world. They were a powerful force that could not be underestimated. If they were targeted by this cultivation sect, Wu Hao and LV Fengping knew very well that it would be a very terrible thing." Wu Hao glared at LV Fengping and said in a low voice, "Are you stupid? If this monk spreads the news that we got the fan of 7 treasures, we will be in trouble." LV Fengping did not speak, but her eyes were still full of hesitation and worry. She opened her mouth and wanted to persuade Wu Hao again, but she saw that the man's eyes were burning with greed. She knew that it was useless to say anything. Li Yundong saw that Wu Hao and LV Fengping were whispering to each other and glancing at him from time to time. He knew that they must have evil intentions and were up to no good. Li Yundong was secretly vigilant. He slowly opened the fan of 7 treasures in front of him. Every time he opened a fan leaf, there was a clanging sound, like a long sword coming out of its sheath, and the sound was sonorous and powerful. When Dorji Tenzin saw that Li Yundong's fan of 7 treasures was covered with golden Sanskrit characters, he suddenly widened his eyes and said, "How can you have such a Buddhist treasure in your hands?" Li Yundong sneered and said, "What, do you want to rob it too?" Dorji Tenzin's expression became serious. He put his palms together and took a deep breath. "Humph, how could an evil person like you have such a Buddhist treasure? I think you must have robbed it. The Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra is the treasure of my esoteric sect. You must return it. As for this treasure, it won't be too late for me to return it when I find out the owner." Li Yundong laughed and said, "You really know how to be a good person." After he finished laughing, he shouted, "If you have the ability, come and take it." With a loud shout, Dorji Tenzin slapped Li Yundong with his palm. As soon as he slapped out, his palm turned blood red, and a blazing heat rushed toward his face. This was one of the 3 unique mudras of the esoteric sect, the devil-subduing mudra. There were 3 mudras in the esoteric sect, namely, the devil-subduing mudra, the Ganges mudra, and the mantra mudra. Among them, the devil-subduing mudra was inclined to the external palm technique in martial arts. When practiced to the peak, the palm could emit a strong wind, which could be used to subdue demons and protect the sect. Dorji Tenzin was an expert in this field. The Ganges mudra was inclined to the Buddhist Dharma. It aimed to use all kinds of mudra to eliminate disasters and save all living beings. It emphasized the Buddhist Dharma and despised the human body, so it did not have much fighting effect. Seeing Dorji Tenzin's devil subduing Madra coming toward him, Li Yundong snorted coldly. Just as he was about to fight back, he saw a black shadow pass by Dorji Tenzin in an instant and pounce on him. Li Yundong took a closer look and found that the whip in LV Fengping's hand had been thrown out first. The tip of the whip turned into a dark red snake head. It spat out its tongue, opened its poisonous fangs, and bit toward Li Yundong. At the same time, Wu Hao also laughed grimly. With a flick of his fingers, 4-5 yang blood beads fiercely hit Li Yundong's head, chest, and abdomen. The other one was aimed at Dorji Tenzin's back. For a moment, the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. The devil subduing Madra, the viper whip, and the fierce 5 yang blood bead attacked from all directions, blocking all the ways for Li Yundong to dodge. /om/ Chapter 188. Go to watch net. In the face of attacks from all directions, Li Yundong did not panic at all. His will had long been tempered like steel. At this critical moment of life and death, he stimulated endless fighting spirit and fighting talent. Go to watch net. He took a step back with his right foot, and then he turned around. The fan of 7 treasures in his hand instantly closed with a swoosh. He swung the head of the fan and hit the tip of the whip in front of him. With a crisp snap, the snake head that the whip had transformed into crashed into the fan of 7 treasures. With a muffled bang, it was forcefully smashed away. In particular, the moment the snake head crashed into the fan of 7 treasures, the treasured fan suddenly emitted a burst of golden light. The golden Sanskrit characters on the treasured fan suddenly lit up and released an incomparably powerful and dignified force that shook the snake head and instantly returned to its original form. With a flick of his wrist, Li Yunyang repelled the first whip that had come at him. Then, he turned around and opened the treasured fan in his hand with a clang. In an instant it was as if a black iron wall had appeared in front of him, blocking him from the wind. Li Yundong waved his hand at the 3-5 yang blood beads that were rotating at high speed. Whoosh! A violent gust of wind rose from the ground, and the 3-5 yang blood beads were immediately bounced back by the strong wind. Taking advantage of this movement, Li Yunyang threw the fan of 7 treasures in his hand into the sky. His empty hands quickly pinched a Mahamudra, and the Yuanyang genuine qi in his body surged out of the Mahamudra. It was the Mahamudra of Vairocana, which did not carry a trace of evil qi all over his body. The exorcism Madra practiced by Dorji Tenzin was a fighting move, while the mantra Mahamudra cultivated by Li Yundong was a supreme protection magic. It was obvious which one was stronger and which one was weaker. When Dorji Tenzin saw Li Yundong's Mahavirocana Madra coming toward him, he was shocked and could hardly believe his eyes. How could such an evil person cultivate such a pure and powerful mantra Mahamudra without a trace of evil qi? How is this possible? Dorji Tenzin barely put his hands in front of his chest to block it, and he was hit away by the Mahavirocana Madra. Watch net. Just as his body was sent flying, he managed to dodge Wu Hao's sneak attack from behind. It was the 5 yang blood flower pearl. Dorji Tenzin dodged the sneak attack, and the 5 yang blood pearl went straight to Li Yunyang. At this time, the fan of 7 treasures in Li Yundong's hand was flying in the air again. He had no weapon to resist, so he was about to be hit. However, Li Yundong did not panic in the face of danger. An idea came to him. He took a deep breath and spat out a fierce, condensed, and vigorous qi from his mouth. In the past, when Li Yundong blew out a breath, although the breath was long and vigorous, it might not be condensed. But at this time, when Li Yundong blew out a breath, he could condense all the breath into a thin line like a strand of hair and blow it right on the 5 yang blood bead. Previously, Li Yundong had used the fan of 7 treasures to fan the 3-5 yang blood beads toward Wu Hao. This time, Wu Hao was scared out of his wits and hurriedly tried to catch the 3 5-yang blood beads. However, the 5-yang blood beads were rotating at a high speed. If he was not careful, the blood beads would immediately explode and swallow Wu Hao. However, Wu Hao was, after all, a disciple of a famous sect. With a somersault, he dodged one of the 5-yang blood beads by a hair's breadth. Then, he caught the other 2 5-yang blood beads with his 2 hands. His body spun on the spot like a spinning top, and the 5-yang blood beads in his palms were also spinning. As long as he stopped his strength, the blood beads would immediately explode. His move was beautiful and wonderful, but he had not expected that Li Yundong's reaction would be even more beautiful and wonderful than his. He actually blew another 5-yang blood bead back in one breath. When Wu Hao saw the 5-yang blood bead coming straight at him, he was scared out of his wits. It was too late for him to dodge, so he had no choice but to copy Li Yundong's method. He took a deep breath and spat at the 5-yang blood bead that was coming at him at high speed. At this moment, the difference between a Zhendan and a pseudo-Dan was obvious. Li Yundong's breath was condensed like a thread, but it was as hard as steel. It forcibly spat out the blood bead and sent it flying back. However, although Wu Hao's breath was strong, it was scattered and not condensed. He only slightly blocked the momentum of the blood bead, and the 5-yang blood bead hit Wu Hao's body. In the blink of an eye, Wu Hao's entire body had turned into a burning ball of fire. He abruptly let out a miserable howl of pain. Just as his scream left his throat, it was immediately drowned out by the wailing of the vengeful spirits and malicious ghosts inside the 5-yang blood flower pearl. His Yin spirit didn't even have time to escape before it was completely devoured by the vengeful spirits. LV Fengping, who was beside him, suddenly screamed. Although she was dissolute and fickle, as a Taoist companion, she had true feelings for Wu Hao. Especially when she saw her man being destroyed in body and soul, LV Fengping suddenly rushed toward Li Yundong like crazy. Go to see net. 7ko/Li Yundong saw her face twisting and rushing toward him regardless of anything. Her 5 fingers were like hooks, and there was a faint blue light on her fingertips. Although her momentum was fierce and her appearance was terrible, he sneered in his heart. He took another step back and dodged LV Fengping's fierce claw. At this time, LV Fengping had lost her mind. Her mind was full of revenge for Wu Hao. As a cultivator, it was not terrible to have their bodies destroyed, because they could still get their Yin spirits out of their bodies and find a way to regenerate or reincarnate to cultivate again. But if their bodies and souls were destroyed, it would really be a tragedy, and they could even be called tableware. LV Fengping's fingernails were blue and glossy, and they were dipped in highly toxic poison. As long as she scratched a little skin, she could immediately poison people to death. Li Yundong had not cultivated to the realm of Yin spirit out of his body. As long as she scratched him, he would undoubtedly die. He wouldn't even have the chance to regenerate or reincarnate. LV Fengping missed the first claw. Just as she was about to scratch again, she suddenly heard a violent whistling sound coming from above her head. She subconsciously raised her head and saw that the fan of 7 treasures that Li Yundong had thrown into the sky had fallen at this time. Taking advantage of the moment she raised her head, Li Yundong quickly pinched the lion's seal in his hand and spat out a mantra, Ma. This mantra came out of Li Yundong's mouth, like an invisible air cannon, and hit LV Fengping's face heavily. Her body shook violently, and her mind went blank in an instant. Following that, the lion's seal came right after, hitting her squarely in the chest, causing her to lose control of her body and fly backward. At this time, Li Yundong raised his hand and accurately grabbed the fast-spinning fan of 7 treasures without looking. He turned around and waved the iron fan with its leaves open. Like waving a huge machete, he slashed at LV Fengping from head to toe. When the leaves of the fan of 7 treasures rotated at high speed, it was really like a chainsaw. With a muffled sound, LV Fengping was instantly split in half by Li Yundong's fan. LV Fengping's body was destroyed, and a ghost that looked exactly like her quickly flew out of her body. She screamed in fear and roared angrily, flying to a height of more than 20 meters like lightning. LV Fengping hovered high in the sky and shouted with resentment, "Impossible. You are just a young boy who has just reached the Zhuji phase. How can you be so powerful? Who the hell are you? Tell me your name if you have the ability." Her expression was full of resentment, as if she couldn't wait to rush down and crazily bite Li Yundong's body. However, she was afraid of Li Yundong's amazing Yuanyang Qi, so she only dared to roar 20 meters away, not daring to take half a step forward. LV Fengping knew very well that with the strength and concentration of Yuanyang Qi that Li Yundong had shown just now, as long as she got a little closer, she would be scared out of her wits with a loud roar. Like Wu Hao, all her cultivation in this life would be in vain. Although it was the first time that Li Yundong had seen a ghost swimming out of a dead person's body, and it was the first time that he had been threatened by such a legendary ghost, the yang qi in his body was extremely strong. How could he be afraid of these demons and ghosts with threatening yin qi? Li Yundong snorted coldly and slammed the fan of 7 treasures in his hand heavily on the ground, causing the ground to tremble slightly. He pointed at LV Fengping, who was hovering in the air, and shouted, "A man never changes his name. Today, I, Li Yundong, will kill you shameless people. Don't forget my name in your next life. I'll be waiting for you." LV Fengping gritted her teeth and roared, "Li Yundong. Li Yundong. Well, I'll remember your name. If I don't kill you in this life, I swear I won't give up." Li Yundong was furious. He only hated that he couldn't fly and could only watch an enemy escape. He shouted, "I wasn't afraid of you when you were alive. Do you think I'm afraid of a lonely ghost like you now? Get lost." This roar almost shattered the ghost of LV Fengping, who was 20 meters away. LV Fengping was so shocked that she retreated another 20 meters. She gave Li Yundong a hateful look and finally turned to leave. When LV Fengping left, she unwillingly released a ghost technique. In an instant, the air was filled with her resentful cries, curses, and sad cries. For a moment, the cold wind was blowing around, and the world was gloomy, which made people's hair stand on end. Although Dorji Tenzin was a warrior monk, he had not cultivated Niden after all. For a moment, he couldn't help but shiver when he was pierced by the cold wind. However, Li Yundong sneered and waved the fan of 7 treasures in his hand. With a whoosh, he blew away the cold wind around him and shouted, "Disperse." In the blink of an eye, the shouts, cries, and gusts of cold wind around him suddenly disappeared, and the hazy world became clear again. Li Yundong stood with his fan like a god. From the absolute disadvantage of fighting 1 against 3, he resolved the situation in the blink of an eye. He fought against many and defeated many. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. It could be said that the hare rose and the falcon fell, and the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Although Dorji Tenzin was among them, the moment he was sent flying, he suddenly understood that he had become an accomplice of Wu Hao and the others. If Li Yundong hadn't blown him away, he would have been burned to ashes like Wu Hao. Dorji Tenzin was shocked by Li Yundong's tyranny and ashamed of his inability to distinguish between good and evil. He sat cross-legged on the ground, put his palms together, recited a few scriptures, and then said in a deep voice, "If you want to kill me, just kill me. I will never complain, /om/." Chapter 189. Go to watch net. In an instant, Li Yundong killed 1 person, killed 1, and defeated 1. Even if he was angry, most of the anger in his heart had been vented. He sneered and said, "You monk are really stupid. How can you believe the words of others? Do you believe whatever they say?" Dorji Tenzin raised his head and argued, "I'm not a monk. I'm a lama." Li Yundong was amused by Dorji Tenzin's straightforwardness and laughed. Well, you're a lama. Hey, you stupid llama, you have some style. You didn't join forces with these two shameless people to beat me. Otherwise, I would have taken your life with that Mahamudra just now. Dorji Tenzin looked at Li Yundong with doubt in his eyes and asked in stiff Chinese, "Who the hell are you? Why can you master our Tantric Mahamudra so quickly? It took my master 2 years to master it." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Is it difficult to learn? Why do I think it's easy?" Dorji Tenzin looked like he had been hit hard. Li Yundong's words hurt him very much. He had been practicing martial arts since he was a child. At the age of 18, he had reached the peak of the devil-subduing Mahamudra. He could already be regarded as a first-class genius in the world. After that, he had practiced the mantra Mahamudra, but because his cultivation was not high enough, he had spent 3 years without even entering the door. However, the Han man in front of him had already mastered the essence of the Mahamudra in less than a few days. Was he a monster or the reincarnation of Buddha? Dorji Tenzin stared at Li Yundong for a long time before he sighed and said dejectedly, "My master once told me not to underestimate the people in the Central Plains. He said that there were hidden dragons and crouching tigers there. I didn't believe it before, but now I do." Go to watch net. 7 KOM. I'm convinced that I will die in your hands. Li Yundong laughed. Did I say that I would kill you? Dorji Tenzin raised his head and asked in confusion, "You won't kill me?" Li Yundong snorted. "I'm not a murderous devil. I'll kill whoever I see." After a moment of silence, Dorji Tenzin said in a deep voice, "Then why did you attack so ruthlessly just now?" Li Yunyang sneered and said, "Just now, those two people wanted to rob me of my treasures, so I naturally fought back. The first time I caught the man, he begged me to let him go. As a result, when I let him go, he immediately attacked me. Just now, he even wanted to kill you. Do you think I should kill such a sinister villain?" Dorji Tenzin stopped talking. After a while, he asked again, "Where's that woman?" Li Yundong sneered again and said, "As for that woman, she colluded with that man. I destroyed her body, but her soul didn't repent. Instead, it gnashed its teeth and wanted to take revenge. Watch net. I only hate myself for not having enough cultivation and not being able to get rid of the weeds by the roots. You Buddhists say to feed the eagle with your body, but I don't have such a noble demeanor. I won't let others bully me and let them do as they please. Amitabha." Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and said, "That's wrong. Buddha can also be angry, and Vajra can also be angry. We Buddhists don't just pay attention to forbearance. When it's time to fight back, we must fight back. Otherwise, our Buddhism would have been destroyed for thousands of years." Li Yundong said with a smile, "I saw that you were as pedantic as an old man, but now it seems that you are quite reasonable." Dorji Tenzin smiled slightly and said, "Although I, Dorji Tenzin, am short-sighted, I can still see good and evil clearly. In the future, if the cultivation sects of these two people come to make trouble for you, I will definitely stand up for them." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Let them come to me. I killed them. I will take responsibility for what I did." At this time, his bad impression of Dorji Tenzin had disappeared, and he couldn't help thinking, "Anyway, I have finished reading the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra and memorized everything I should. This sutra is so important to them. Why don't I help them and return it to them?" Thinking of this, Li Yundong reached into his arms and took out the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra. He handed it over and said with a smile, "Fortunately, it wasn't burned just now." Dorji Tenzin had originally come to Li Yundong to ask for the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra, but such an embarrassing thing had happened halfway. Not only had he wronged a good person, but he had also become an accomplice of a criminal. In the end, he had even been saved by Li Yundong. Dorji Tenzin felt guilty. He didn't want to go back and be punished by the abbot, so he didn't mention this matter again. However, he hadn't expected that Li Yundong would take the initiative to return it. Dorji Tenzin was ashamed and shocked. He could hardly believe his eyes. He stammered, this. Li Yundong smiled and said, why? Are you afraid that I'm lying to you? Dorji Tenzin took the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra and carefully put it close to his body. He put his palms together with emotion and bowed respectfully. I underestimated the people in the Central Plains. I haven't asked for your name yet. Li Yundong smiled and said, my name is Li Yundong. Go to the internet. 7 K.O.M. Dorji Tenzin praised, it turns out to be Jinren Li, clouds come from the east. Good name, good name. Li Yundong laughed and said, you Lama, you shouted to kill me before, and now you flatter me. I have no benefits for you. Dorji Tenzin bowed respectfully and said, benefactor, the fact that you have returned this Mahamudra secret scripture is already a great kindness to our temple. We, the Catholic temple, will always remember this kindness. Li Yundong smiled and didn't say anything more. At this time, a gust of wind blew over, and the smell of blood was pungent. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, strictly speaking, I don't seem to be from a Taoist sect. Dorji Tenzin couldn't help but be stunned. What do you mean? Li Yundong smiled awkwardly and said, I haven't really been apprenticed to a teacher yet. Dorji Tenzin's face was suddenly full of shock. Did you learn it without a teacher? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, not really. There are 2 cultivators who have taught me. One is from the Fox Zen school, and the other is from the Jingyi school. Dorji Tenzin rarely went out of the temple and practiced Mahamudra and Dharma all day long. He didn't know that the Fox Zen school had a bad reputation. When he heard the word Zen in it, he thought that they were from the same sect. He immediately laughed and said, I was wondering how you could practice Mahamudra so quickly. It turns out that you are from the same sect. But why is there a Jingyi school? Li Yundong sighed and said, it's a long story. Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, if you don't mind, why don't you go to Kathuo Temple to rest for 2 days? It can be said that Jinren Li and I don't know each other unless we fight. We can talk while drinking milk wine. What do you think, Jinren Li? Li Yundong thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, forget it. Now that I have successfully built the Zhuji phase, I'm eager to go back. I can't wait to grow wings and fly back. I'll have a long talk with you when I have the chance. Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and said with regret, that's a pity. I hope that when you return to the Central Plains, you must remember that you still have a friend here. His name is Dorji Tenzin. Li Yundong smiled and said, of course. As he said this, he carried the fan of 7 treasures on his shoulder and left quickly. Dorji Tenzin looked at Li Yundong's departing figure and couldn't help sighing. This person is so young, but he has such a cultivation quotient. The Central Plains is really a place of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. No wonder the Han people have been prosperous for thousands of years. Dorji Tenzin couldn't help but think of Li Yundong's calmness and response when he had fought against 3 people alone. In particular, he had taken a step back, thrown away the treasured fan, and made a Mahamudra move. It was really a combination of defense and defense. He had both the fist and foot kung fu of the external sects and the Mahamudra kung fu of the cultivation sections. In the blink of an eye, Li Yundong had combined these together and turned the tide. He had defeated many people with fewer people. The talent he had shown were really admirable and awe-inspiring. Dorji Tenzin thought, Jinren Li has just built the Zhuji phase. When he first met a strong enemy, he has already shown the temperament of a master who is calm in the face of danger. In time, he will definitely become a great master and a great craftsman. I strongly recommend the new book, Sekil, by Xiao Qian, the author of the fantasy novel, Piaomiao Journey. If you are interested, hurry up and read it. This book can't be wrong, /om/. Chapter 190. Go to watch net. Li Yundong refused Dorji Tenzin's invitation and returned along the way he had come. After walking for more than an hour, the sky was already a little dark. He came to a clear and spacious river, bent down to drink a few mouthfuls of the cool river water, and washed his face a few times. Go to watch net. Net. Super_speed. More. New. Li Yundong raised his head and suddenly found a graceful figure standing in front of him. This person was wearing a long purple dress and a faint layer of white gauze. Her whole body seemed to be shrouded in a faint fairy mist. Her face was extremely beautiful, and her eyes were hazy and deep. It was Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong carefully, and a hint of appreciation flashed in her eyes. Li Yundong was stunned when he suddenly saw Zi Yuan. He looked around and said in surprise, "Why are you here?" Zi Yuan said with a smile, "Didn't I say that I would come to you when you succeeded in the Zhuji phase?" Li Yundong said in surprise, "Do you have telepathy? How could you come so soon?" Zi Yuan smiled but didn't say anything. Li Yundong suddenly had an idea and asked tentatively, "You won't be following me all the time, will you?" Zi Yuan didn't answer. She turned around and walked in one direction. Li Yundong shouted behind her, "Hey, I'm talking to you. You haven't been following me all the way, have you?" But Zi Yuan didn't reply. She just walked in front of him unhurriedly. Li Yundong caught up with her and said in a strange voice, "Hey, if you really follow me all the time and see me almost get into trouble along the way, won't you help me?" Zi Yuan suddenly stopped, turned around, and said seriously, "Do you know what a saying in the Book of Changes says?" Li Yundong was stunned. "I don't know." Zi Yuan said, "Heaven moves vigorously, and a gentleman should constantly strive to improve himself." Li Yundong's expression became serious. He vaguely understood what Zi Yuan meant by this. Zi Yuan looked serious, which was rare for her. She continued, "Do you know what this sentence means? What does it mean to constantly strive to improve oneself? Why don't you call him constantly strive to improve himself? If I appear to help you whenever you are in trouble, is that still considered cultivation? Always remember, the only one who can help you in this world is yourself." Li Yundong was shocked. He thought to himself, "Yes, if I hadn't cultivated so hard along the way, how could I have succeeded in the Zhuji phase on a peak of more than 6,000 meters? How could he have mastered the giant palm imprint so quickly? How could he have survived the sneak attack of those two criminals?" The first sentence of the Qian hexagram in the Book of Changes clearly stated, "As the heavens move vigorously, so should a gentleman ceaselessly strive to improve himself." Did he think that after obtaining the Renyuan Jindan, he would not have to work hard and all the benefits would automatically come to him? Li Yundong looked solemn and said seriously, "I've learned a lot. Thank you for your warning. I was being frivolous just now." Zi Yuan nodded with a smile on her face. "You don't have to be so nervous. I've seen your performance along the way. The speed of your cultivation is really shocking and rare in the world. Just remember not to be complacent. You have to know that you have just entered the first door on the path of cultivation." Li Yundong nodded and looked a little emotional. "You're right. Human cognition is like a circle. Watch net." The area inside the circle was his perception, and the outside was the world. The smaller the area inside, the less contact I have with this world. When my knowledge suddenly expanded a lot, I found that I was even more ignorant about this world. Zi Yuan smiled and said, "That's because you've come into contact with more unknown things. Your current cultivation progress is too fast. Although your skills are growing very fast, your cultivation foundation is still not solid enough. There are many things that you only know how, but you don't know why. For example, what's up with your Mahamudra Kung Fu? Where did the Mahamudra of Tantric Buddhism come from? Why does it have to be accompanied by mantras to be effective? Li Yundong was stunned when he heard this, and his eyes lit up involuntarily. Yes, why haven't I thought about this? He looked at Zi Yuan eagerly and asked, can you tell me why? Zi Yuan smiled and said, I still say the same thing. Heaven is vigorous, and a gentleman should constantly strive to improve himself. I can only show you a way. As for how to go on this road, that's your own business. After you go back, you can slowly look for relevant books and read them yourself. Li Yundong said in surprise, these books are also cultivation books like the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor. Are they everywhere? Zi Yuan sighed and said, the Great Way is invisible, and Dali is simple. Go to watch net. Many people are anxiously looking at the broad road of cultivation from afar, but they never thought that the true road of cultivation is right under their own feet. Li Yundong had some understanding in his heart and nodded secretly. He said, are we going to fly all the way back now? Zi Yuan laughed and said, fly back. Are you kidding? The terrain of the Qinghai Tibet Plateau is so high, and it is already very close to the sky. If you fly again, and it's midsummer now, aren't you afraid of being struck by lightning? Li Yundong asked in confusion, what's the reason? Zi Yuan explained softly, this is the same as a lightning rod. Cultivators themselves are extremely powerful bodies of energy, and the heavens are very sensitive to these bodies of energy. It's fine if you stay low, but you yourself are a huge body of energy, and you are flying so high, especially in the summer when there are so many lightning bolts. If the lightning doesn't strike you, who will it strike? As she spoke, Zi Yuan added, you must remember the two laws of the cultivation world, the closer you are to the sky, the closer the lightning is to you, the greater your strength, the greater the power of the lightning retribution in the future. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly. Doesn't that mean that I will be struck by lightning no matter what, and it will be the kind of death? Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, that's not necessarily true. Why do we Taoists cultivate to seek longevity? It's because we believe that man can triumph over nature. As she spoke, she took another step forward. As she walked forward, she said, let's go. It's time to go back. When we go back, I can teach you the magic of Shentong. Li Yundong couldn't help but be excited when he heard this. Can you teach me the magic of flying first? Zi Yuan smiled and said, you can't become fat in one go. Let's do it step by step. As she spoke, she remembered something. She took out a ticket from her pocket and handed it to Li Yundong, saying, this is your ticket. So nice. You even bought a ticket for me. Are you a fortune teller? How do you know that I will succeed in the Zhuji phase at this time? Li Yundong took the ticket with a smile, but after taking a look, he was stunned. No way, Pu Lai. Without turning her head, Zi Yuan said, you're right, Pu Lai. Li Yundong was stunned and said, do you mean the kind of train that stops at every stop, and the aisles are crowded with people? Even if you want to go to the toilet, you can't. Zi Yuan stopped and couldn't help sighing. It seems so. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Really? I'm a man, so it's fine. But you, a beautiful woman like a fairy, are going to take this kind of Pu Lai with me? Are you kidding me? Zi Yuan turned her face and looked at Li Yundong. Do you think I'm an omnipotent immortal? Even if the sect behind me has a connection, it can't extend here. This is the land of the esoteric sect. I even lined up to buy this ticket. Li Yundong smiled apologetically and said, you can buy a train. Zi Yuan showed a rare girlish expression. She rubbed her temples and said with a wry smile, don't you know that it's the peak time for students to go back to school? It's very difficult to buy a ticket. Zi Yuan's expression made Li Yundong suddenly realize that this beautiful woman in front of him, who looked otherworldly, was actually a girl about the same age as him. It turns out that a fairy also has to worry about such things in the human world. Li Yundong couldn't help but chuckle. Zi Yuan glanced at Li Yundong and couldn't help thinking, today, I saw him fight 1 against 3. Although he was ruthless, killing one and killing another, his words and actions were still reasonable. He didn't let his anger get to his head. The few moves he used to turn defeat into victory were even more wonderful, showing the bearing of a grandmaster. She had thought that he was young and mature, but now it seemed that he was still a teenager. However, he was a boy who had just turned 20, not much older than Hong Ling, so she couldn't be too harsh on him. Li Yundong suddenly met an acquaintance in this strange Qinghai, Tibet plateau. Thinking that he could go back soon, he couldn't help but be in a good mood. He waved his hand and laughed. Let's go home. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly froze and asked, where are we taking the train? Lessa. Zi Yuan said. Li Yundong asked with a strange expression, how far is it from here? Zi Yuan said with a faint expression, probably a few 100 kilometers. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, are we going to run all the way there? Zi Yuan looked at him strangely. Do you want to fly there and be struck by lightning? As she said this, she pointed to the sky. Li Yundong looked up and saw dark clouds rolling above his head. He couldn't help cursing, damn it, I've just reached the Zhuji phase, and now there's a dark cloud over my head. What do you mean? Zi Yuan took a step forward and said, let's go. You're not slow. After running for a few days, you'll be able to get there. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He laughed and said, I've got a way. As he said this, he ran in the direction of his Zhuji phase. After a few steps, he looked back and saw Zi Yuan standing there looking at him in confusion. Li Yundong ran back again, grabbed her hand, and said, just come with me. I have a way. Zi Yuan was caught off guard and her hand was grabbed by Li Yundong. Her body shook slightly and her eyes widened. She looked at Li Yundong holding her wrist in astonishment. Only then did Li Yundong realize that he had been a little rash. He let go of her hand and smiled embarrassedly. I'm sorry, I was just a little excited. Well, I didn't mean anything else. Don't think too much about it. I just suddenly remembered that the 2 guys who wanted to rob me just now left a car there. We can drive there. After all, it'll save us more time, right? Zi Yuan was stunned for a moment before she regained her composure. She said lightly, it's okay. You lead the way, and I'll follow you. Although her expression was calm, when Li Yundong turned his back on her, her other hand unconsciously pressed on the wrist that had been grabbed by Li Yundong just now. Her thoughts were complicated, and for a moment, her eyes were faintly lost in thought. Once Jin Dan appears, the world will be settled, and the first thunder will show the truth. What does it mean to see the truth? Is it true love or the truth? She had thought that the last time this boy had attracted thunder to enforce justice on behalf of heaven, it should have been the psalm of, the first thunder will show the truth, but after thinking about it, she felt that it was wrong. Although the boy in front of her was a rare cultivation genius in 100 years, he loved another woman deeply, and she had no feelings for him. No matter how she looked at it, it was impossible for the 2 of them to be together. What did Master's psalm mean? Looking at Li Yundong's back, Zi Yuan couldn't help but feel a myriad of emotions in her heart and worry, /om/. Chapter 191. Go to watch net. Li Yundong laughed dryly a few times and walked quickly in front of her. After taking a few steps, he was worried that Zi Yuan wouldn't be able to keep up with him if he walked too slowly, so he turned around and saw that Zi Yuan was about a meter behind him, walking at a moderate pace. Go to watch net. 7 km. Li Yundong was curious. Does this fairy-like girl always have such a calm and detached demeanor? He couldn't help but speed up. His fast steps had already turned into a jog. After running for a while, he couldn't help but look back. However, he saw that Zi Yuan was still following behind him at a moderate pace. Her pace was neither fast nor slow. She was still as calm as before, as if she was taking a leisurely stroll. Li Yundong simply ran quickly. His running speed was astonishing, no less than that of a cheetah. At this moment, he looked back and saw that Zi Yuan was still following him at a leisurely pace. She was still calm and at ease. Li Yundong was convinced. He shook his head and sighed to himself, "Oh my, the people from the righteous sects are really different." After running for a while, he ran back to the place where he had fought with Wu Hao, Lv Fengping, and the others. Li Yundong saw that although there were still bloodstains on the ground, the bodies had disappeared. The Land Rover they had driven was still there. He was stunned and felt a little strange, but then he thought, Dorji Tenzin must have cleaned up this place. He turned to Zi Yuan and said, "The car is still here." As he said this, he got into the back seat of the Land Rover, patted the door, and said to Zi Yuan with a smile, "It's a waste not to use it." "Wouldn't it be a waste to leave it here for others to take advantage of?" Zi Yuan sighed and shook her head. She thought to herself, why is this guy like a master for a while and a child for a while? Which side is his true nature? She followed him into the Land Rover and also sat in the back. Li Yundong was stunned. Looking at Zi Yuan, who was sitting side by side with him, he couldn't help saying, "Why are you sitting here? You don't know how to drive?" Zi Yuan looked helpless. "No." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "If you don't know how to drive, why did you follow me? Why didn't you stop me? Wouldn't it have been a waste of time?" Zi Yuan looked at him speechlessly. "I thought you knew how to drive." Li Yundong put his head in his hands and shouted, "Oh my God, this is a joke." Li Yundong and Zi Yuan looked at each other in the back seat. After staring at each other for a while, Li Yundong said dejectedly, "Do we have to walk?" Zi Yuan couldn't help laughing and said, "What's the matter? Junrenli has run more than 2,000 kilometers all the way here. You don't want to run now?" Li Yundong sighed. "I really want to tell Su Chan the news of my success in the Zhuji phase immediately. She must be very worried about me. She hasn't heard from me for nearly 2 months. I can't wait to go home." Zi Yuan smiled slightly. She had wanted to say that the closer one got to the journey, the better. But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she looked at Li Yundong's eyes, which were full of worry and concern. In the end, she didn't say it. Watch net. 7 KOM. Li Yundong gritted his teeth and said, "Forget it. I'll drive." Zi Yuan asked curiously, Didn't you say you didn't know how to drive?" Li Yundong snorted and said, "I haven't eaten pork, but haven't I seen a pig run?" As he said this, he got out of the car and went to the driver's seat. Li Yundong recalled some of the skills and movements of the drivers he had seen on weekdays. He turned the car key, put down the handbrake, and stepped on the accelerator. The engine of the Land Rover rumbled under the accelerator, but the car didn't move. Li Yundong said in confusion, "Strange, why isn't the car moving? It can't be broken, can it?" Zi Yuan poked her head out from the back seat, pointed to the clutch and gear with a smile, and said, "How can you change gears if you don't step on the clutch? How can you drive if you don't change gears?" Li Yundong suddenly realized something. He stepped on the clutch and put the gear into our gear. Suddenly, the car slammed backward. Although Zi Yuan had the ability to predict, she had to do a divination beforehand to know. After all, she was not an immortal. How could she have known that Li Yundong had put the car into reverse gear? Zi Yuan was caught off guard. Her body suddenly fell forward, and her forehead hit the back of Li Yundong's head heavily. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan cried out at the same time and held their heads. Li Yundong slammed on the brake and pulled the handbrake. The car immediately stalled. He rubbed the back of his head and looked back with his teeth bared, only to see Zi Yuan covering her forehead with a painful expression. Accident, it was purely an accident. Li Yundong smiled awkwardly. While rubbing the pain, he explained, I didn't expect this thing to be so disobedient. Although Zi Yuan was one of the best cultivators of the younger generation, she had not cultivated to the Jinshan phase of the Vajra body. She was a delicate beauty, but when she was hit by Li Yundong, she almost cried from the pain. If you don't know how to drive, then don't. Zi Yuan couldn't help complaining as she rubbed her forehead. Go to the internet. Li Yundong smiled apologetically and said, it was a mistake, it was definitely a mistake. The ancient said, everyone makes mistakes. Give me another chance. As he said this, Li Yundong took a deep breath and carefully started the car again. Then, he put it in first gear and gently stepped on the accelerator. However, the car roared, but it didn't move. Li Yundong was stunned and thought, impossible, why is it still not moving? This time I put it in gear. Li Yundong subconsciously stepped on the accelerator. The roar of the motor became louder and louder, but the car still didn't move. When Li Yundong stepped on the accelerator to the end, the Land Rover's motor roared like a monster, and the car slowly moved. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile proudly and say, I'm really a genius. I can drive without a teacher. But after driving for a while, he found that no matter how he stepped on the accelerator, the car couldn't speed up. He couldn't help but wonder, this car is even slower than an ox cart. What's going on? It's not normal. Moreover, the more Li Yundong drove, the more he found that he could smell something burning. He twitched his nose and asked curiously, why is there a burning smell? Zi Yuan looked like she had been defeated by him. She rubbed her temples and pointed at the handbrake, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. You didn't put down the handbrake. Li Yundong raised his head and laughed. I was wondering what was going on. As he said this, he pressed down on the handbrake. Suddenly, the Land Rover was like a runaway wild horse, madly rushing out. Zi Yuan let out a cry and was thrown into the back seat. She couldn't help smiling bitterly and thinking, I really took the wrong medicine. Why did I have to accompany him to go crazy? Driving was actually a very low-skill thing, especially in a place like the Qinghai, Tibet Plateau, where there were few vehicles and people. Even if Li Yundong used this place as a rally track, no one would care about him. As long as the car started, it would be easy to drive again. Li Yundong finally found the feeling of driving. He could feel the wind whistling in his ears. He couldn't help but laugh. See, I told you I'd be fine. This car is so cool to drive. It's as fast as lightning. Li Yundong thought for a moment, then laughed. Zi Yuan said with a wry smile, you said it was as fast as lightning after just one shift? Li Yundong responded and immediately switched to second gear. Not long after that, he switched to third gear. After driving like this for a while, the Land Rover rushed to fifth gear. When the car went from first to fifth gear, the speed became obvious. The wind beside the car window was whistling, and it really felt like it was going to be fast. The more Li Yundong drove, the more comfortable he became. He couldn't help turning back and saying with a smile, look, is there any problem? But when he turned back, he found that Zi Yuan was sitting in the back seat, her hands grabbing the handrails of the car door tightly. Her face was full of fear, as if the car would crash and she would die in the next second. Li Yundong usually only saw Zi Yuan's calm and ethereal temperament and expression. He had never seen her like this before. He suddenly laughed and said, Fairy, are you also afraid of racing? Zi Yuan was really a little scared by Li Yundong's rough driving skills. Although cultivators were sometimes powerful, they were not immortal. If there was a car accident, the doors on both sides would be locked, and there would be no place for her to escape. The car would become a ready-made coffin. Zi Yuan forced herself to calm down and said, "I'm not afraid of racing, but I'm afraid of you driving." Li Yundong was choked by her words and laughed dryly. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Zi Yuan suddenly widen her eyes, straighten her body, point to the front, and shout, "Be careful." Li Yundong quickly turned his head, but suddenly saw that he had already deviated from the road. He suddenly screamed in fright and slammed his feet. This subconscious action of his was a mistake that almost all novice drivers would make, stepping on the gas pedal as the brake pedal. The Land Rover suddenly roared out of the road. Fortunately, the Qinghai, Tibet plateau was wide, and there was only grass on both sides of the road. It was not like the city, where as long as one drove off the road, it would immediately cause a car accident. However, the grass road was not smooth, and the Land Rover was fast. The car suddenly became a mad bull in the Spanish bullring, jumping wildly on the grass. Zi Yuan, who was in the car, was so shaken that she almost fell apart. Her hair was messy and she looked embarrassed. She wanted to ask Li Yundong to stop, but the car was shaking so much that she couldn't even say a complete sentence. "Hurry, hurry, stop, stop, stop." With just a few words, Zi Yuan almost bit her own tongue. The number one person of the younger generation in the cultivation world almost bit her tongue. No one would believe it. Only then did Li Yundong come to his senses and slam on the brakes. The roaring Land Rover suddenly screeched to a stop. Zi Yuan couldn't control her momentum, so she suddenly rushed forward and hit the back of Li Yundong's head with a bang. Li Yundong was hit by her, and with the inertia of the car, his head also hit the window. Fortunately, the window was bulletproof, so it didn't break his Jindan body. Li Yundong covered his forehead, feeling dizzy and dizzy. He gritted his teeth and struggled to get up. He looked back and asked, "Hey, are you okay?" When he asked this, Li Yundong knew that he had asked too much. Zi Yuan was sitting in the back seat with her hair disheveled. She was covering her nose with her hand and looking at him with resentment and anger in her eyes. The future leader of the Lingong sect of Zhengyi school had been tortured like this. How could she be okay? Li Yundong laughed dryly. "It's just an accident. It's just a small matter. Is your nose okay?" It would have been better if she hadn't asked, but as soon as she did, Zi Yuan suddenly became angry. "Yes, I am indeed a cultivator who has been born into the world. I pay attention to calmness, but you bastard can't do this. You don't know how to drive, but you try to be brave. Now, my nose is almost broken." Thinking of this, Zi Yuan felt wronged. She had started cultivating when she was in her mother's womb. At the age of 10, she had reached the Zhuji phase. At the age of 18, she had become one of the best of the younger generation in the cultivation world. No matter who saw her, they would be respectful and polite, especially those male cultivators. Which one of them didn't treat her like an immortal? This person doesn't know how to be kind to women at all. Damn it! Zi Yuan was so angry that she let go of his hand and said loudly, "I'm okay. Can I be okay?" She had hit herself too hard just now. If it weren't for the fact that the qi in her body was so strong that she could control the contraction of the blood vessels in her nasal cavity, she would have had a nosebleed by now. Although she hadn't made a fool of herself, her nose was still inevitably red, which made her look a little funny. Li Yundong had seen Zi Yuan's fairy-like face many times, so when he suddenly saw her embarrassed appearance, he suddenly burst into laughter. However, he reacted quickly and forcibly controlled his laughter. It was a good thing that he didn't laugh out loud. He suddenly felt that the ethereal fairy in front of him seemed to have fallen into the mortal world. Although she was no longer as elegant as she used to be, she was a little more approachable. Notice, due to some reasons, the previous Fox Group 2 is hereby invalid. The new Fox Group 2 is 1018889901. Everyone is welcome to be a guest. /om/ Ziyuan ignored him and continued driving, leaving Li Yundong to yell, "Hey, say something, please say something. Hey, you don't have to do this to me, right? I have no enmity with you. Hey, I know I was wrong. Can't we walk back? Holy shit, you're already at 200 yards. Holy shit. Help me." Li Yundong stretched his neck and screamed. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Watch net. 7 KOM. Ziyuan was driving the Land Rover, and the more she drove, the more excited she became. She had the pleasure of getting her revenge. The more Li Yundong drove, the more frightened he became. He thought in despair. Confucius said that since ancient times, only women and villains are difficult to raise. I originally thought that Ziyuan, who was like a fairy, wouldn't be like this, but I didn't expect that a fairy was also a woman. While Li Yundong was worrying about Ziyuan, Su Chan, the little fox, was cultivating with her master in the distant Dongwu city. The little lass felt that she had been feeling a little restless recently. She didn't know why, but even when she was meditating, she always felt that she couldn't calm her mind or calm down. The little girl closed her eyes and frowned. Although she was meditating, her face was full of impatience. She opened one eye and carefully glanced at Ao Wushuang, who was meditating in front of her. She hesitated for a moment and wanted to speak, but when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she swallowed them back. Although Ao Wushuang's eyes were closed, she seemed to know her disciple's every move. She closed her eyes and asked calmly, "What do you want to say? If it's still the same, don't ask again." Su Chan was happy at first, but then she was disappointed. She lowered her head with puffed cheeks, but after a while, she still raised her head and asked weakly, "Master, has Yundong succeeded in the Zhuji phase?" Ao Wushuang opened her eyes helplessly. "You've asked this question 4,815 times. Su Chan didn't care about meditating and practicing qi. She smiled cheekily, rushed to Ao Wushuang, and hugged her arm coquettishly. "Master, don't you have the ability to count fingers? You can count." Ao Wushuang was speechless by this precious disciple. She sighed and said, "Since last month, you have been asking me this question. I can't calm down even when I'm meditating and practicing qi. For a whole month, not only did I not make any progress, but I even regressed. If word of this gets out, it will be a huge joke." Su Chan was obviously annoyed by Ao Wushuang's scolding. Not only was she not ashamed, but she said with a smile, "Master, then let me go back to Yundong. Only by his side can I calm down and cultivate." Ao Wushuang was so angry that she scolded, "You be ****. I've caught you 10 times in a month, and you still have the nerve to say that. Don't you know that if you go to his side now, not only will you cause trouble for him, but you will also implicate him and make him unable to pass the heavenly tribulation? Do you want to die with him, or endure the pain of lovesickness for a moment so that you can be with him in the future?" Su Chan pouted. She wasn't stupid. How could she not understand these things? But sometimes, people clearly knew that they shouldn't do something, but their hearts still itched to do it. Watch net. 7 KOM. Su Chan lowered her head listlessly and muttered, "I'm just going to take a look at him and then leave. I don't know if he has gained weight or lost weight in the past 2 months." Ao Wushuang saw her little daughter's expression. If it had been a month ago, she would have had some sympathy and pity for her, but now there was only anger in her heart. She immediately said angrily, "It hasn't even been 2 months. As the successor of Jindan and a cultivator, if he has gained weight after 2 months of cultivation, then he doesn't have to wait for the heavenly tribulation to come. He can just find a rope and hang himself. Su Chan immediately raised her head and made a face. Don't talk about my Yundong like that. Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. Isn't that what you said? Su Chan lowered her head and said in a sullen voice, her fingers tugging at the corner of her clothes. After a while, she raised her head and asked again, Master, can you calculate again and see if he has succeeded in the Zhuji phase? You said that if he succeeds in the Zhuji phase, you will know. Ao Wushuang was a little driven crazy by her precious disciple. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she suddenly saw a paper crane flying in from outside the window. This crane was very small, almost half the size of a little fingernail. If one didn't look carefully, they would think it was a white fly. Ao Wushuang opened her palm, and the little crane obediently stopped in her palm. As soon as it fell, it turned into a ball of flame in the blink of an eye. After a while, it turned into a small mass of ashes. Ao Wushuang's expression changed. Her eyes flickered as she stood where she was without saying a word. Although Su Chan was curious, she didn't dare to disturb her master. She just looked at her eagerly, looking forward to something. After a while, Ao Wushuang came to her senses. Seeing the little girl like this, she couldn't help laughing. Well, now you can rest assured. Your Yundong has finally succeeded in the Zhuji phase. Now you can cultivate in peace, right? When Su Chan heard this, she was overjoyed. With a scream, she rushed to Ao Wushuang, grabbed her hand, and jumped up and down. Is it true? Is it true? Ao Wushuang looked at her precious disciple lovingly and pretended to be unhappy. When have I ever lied to you? Are you relieved now? Can you cultivate in peace? Su Chan giggled and said, Master, you treat me the best. It was Su Chan. The little girl stuck out her tongue and giggled. Master, I didn't sneak back by myself. I went back with you. It's not against my master's order, is it? But as soon as she finished speaking, she heard a cold and complacent voice behind her. Little girl, not bad. You know how to play the trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain. Ao Wushuang proudly poked the Shentang acupoint on the little girl's back with her finger. Suddenly, the little girl's figure suddenly twisted, and then disappeared in an instant. She turned into a talisman and floated down. Ao Wushuang picked up the talisman in astonishment and saw that there were not only incantations and runes written on it, but also a ghost face drawn on it. It said, Master, not only do I know how to lure the tiger away from the mountain, but I also know how to disguise myself. After reading it, Ao Wushuang realized that this was an illusion deliberately left by the little girl. She suddenly became furious. Evil disciple, how dare you fight with me, /om/. Chapter 193. Go to watch net. Realizing that she had been tricked, Ao Wushuang rushed out of the door again in the blink of an eye. But not long after she rushed out, she rushed back again. She looked around suspiciously and shouted, Evil disciple, if you don't want to be expelled from the sect, come out now. But even after she shouted for a while, the surroundings were still quiet, not a single sound could be heard. Go to watch net. 7:ko/you really ran away. After that, her figure instantly turned into a green light and left in the blink of an eye. After a long time, a figure slowly appeared in the room. Her eyes kept rolling, and her face was full of vigilance. It was Su Chan. After a long time, a figure slowly appeared in the room. Her eyes kept rolling, and her face was full of vigilance. It was Su Chan. Su Chan patted her chest and said with lingering fear, Fortunately, I was careful, or I would have been tricked. Su Chan was only a three-tailed spiritual fox. Compared with her master, the magic she knew was not as many, but she was proficient in the magic of hiding, especially the invisibility spell and the illusion spell. If she hadn't cultivated this kind of magic to a higher level, Ao Wushuang wouldn't have dared to give her the Renyuan Jindan. But the magic that Ao Wushuang had painstakingly taught to Su Chan in the past was now being used on her. How could she not be angry? Su Chan naturally knew this. She stuck out her tongue, put her palms together, and begged, "Master, you are a magnanimous person. You won't argue with me, right? I'm just going to take a look." After that, she also turned into a green light and went straight to Tiannan City. As soon as she flew into the air, Su Chan felt as if there was a pair of incomparably majestic eyes staring at her from the sky. An extremely powerful force was gradually accumulating above her head, as if thunder would fall at any time. Su Chan's heart was beating wildly. She knew that at this time, there was the most thunder. She was actually flying in the air, which was simply telling God, "I am a cultivator, come and strike me." However, Su Chan was penniless, and there was no way she could take the train back. She had no choice but to bite the bullet and fly back. After flying for more than an hour, a terrible omen suddenly flashed through her heart. She shivered and quickly landed on the ground. Su Chan looked up and saw dark clouds rolling in the sky, piling up above her head. Thunder and lightning flashed in the clouds. Su Chan shivered and didn't dare to fly again. She ran quickly on the ground. She waited until the dark clouds above her head slowly dissipated, then flew up again. When the dark clouds in the sky gathered again, she landed on the ground again. Watch net. After more than 2 hours, Su Chan finally returned to Tiannan City. As soon as she stepped into the city, she seemed to feel a familiar aura in the air. She comforted her and said, "You stupid girl, how do you know that he has another woman?" Su Chan raised her head and said with tears in her eyes, "I saw a vase of flowers in the room. It was just put in today. Yundong never does these things by himself. It must be another woman who did it for him." Ao Wushuang sighed and said, "You're really stupid. It's just a vase. How can you be sure that he has a woman? Besides, if you really want to be with him, then you have to remember clearly that you can't not trust him. If you really love him, then you have to trust him. Otherwise, don't love him and save yourself from endless troubles in the future." Su Chan sniffled, wiped away her tears, and looked at her master eagerly. "I know what you're saying, but I'm just sad." Ao Wushuang pretended to be angry and said, "You're already crying before you see him. If you really see him, won't you die? Hurry up and go back with me, or I'll really expel you." Su Chan rubbed the corner of her clothes with her hand and asked timidly, "Can I go to Yundong's room and have a look? I want to smell his breath." Foxes were suspicious by nature. Once they suspected something, it was as if there was a knot in their hearts that was difficult to untie. Su Chan said it nicely, but she really wanted to smell the smell of Li Yundong's bed. If he really had another woman, she would be able to smell it at once. Ao Wushuang knew what her beloved disciple was thinking. She was so angry that she laughed and waved her hand impatiently. "Go, go," Su Chan said, wiped her tears again, and pushed open the door of Li Yundong's room. She looked timid, as if she was afraid of something. Su Chan pushed the door open and closed it, as if she didn't want Ao Wushuang to see what she was doing. Ao Wushuang shook her head and was speechless at Su Chan's childish temper. She stood in the living room and looked around. After waiting for about a minute, she couldn't help but say, "Hey, are you done?" She shouted, but there was no movement inside. Ao Wushuang suddenly became vigilant. Could it be that this girl really noticed that there was another woman in there and took it too hard? Ao Wushuang immediately rushed over, pushed the door open, and shouted, "Chaner." As soon as she opened the door, she saw Su Chan sitting on the edge of the bed with her back to her, in a daze. Hearing Ao Wushuang's shout, Su Chan turned her head. Her beautiful face was full of tears. Ao Wushuang immediately said with a frosty face, "What's wrong? That heartless man really has another woman." Su Chan smiled through her tears. She held up a pink Hello Kitty piggy bank with both hands and said happily, "Master, look." Ao Wushuang didn't know what her precious disciple wanted to do. She said in confusion, "What are you looking at? Isn't it just a piggy bank?" Su Chan shook her head and said, "No, this is a piggy bank that Yundong bought for me. I just found out that he has been putting this piggy bank next to his pillow." Ao Wushuang couldn't keep up with her little girl's thoughts and asked tentatively, "And then?" Su Chan's eyes suddenly became very gentle. Her gaze was so bright that even well-tempered steel could be softened. She said softly, "This means that when he was here, he thought of me every day. When he saw this piggy bank, it was as if he saw me. Moreover, when he went to the Zhuji phase this time, he didn't break this piggy bank and take out the money inside. He almost had no money on him, but he didn't have the heart to break it. It can be seen that he has me in his heart." Ao Wushuang looked at Su Chan and couldn't help sighing. "You silly girl, now you're finally relieved, aren't you? Can you go now?" Su Chan carefully put the piggy bank back in its original position. She raised her head and said with a pleading face, "Master, can I leave a note? Tell him not to worry about me. When I go back, I will listen to you obediently." Ao Wushuang said helplessly, "Forget it, you can write it. If I don't let you write, I think you'll be in Chao Ying's camp with me." Su Chan smiled happily. "Master, you're the best." As she said that, she rummaged through the bedside table for a while and found a notebook and a pen. She bit the tip of the pen and thought for a while before writing on the paper, "Uncle, Xiaoniu came back. Xiaoniu missed you very much." "Uncle, did you miss Xiaoniu?" But after she finished writing, she felt that it was inappropriate, so she tore off another page and wrote, "Yundong, have you succeeded in the Zhuji phase? I miss you very much. I miss you very, very much." After writing, she seemed to be afraid that Li Yundong didn't know who had written this note, so she wrote her name at the bottom, Su Chan. But after the little girl finished writing, she tilted her head and looked at it for a while, then tore it up again discontentedly. Ao Wushuang couldn't help but say impatiently, "Are you done?" Su Chan was urged, so she simply didn't write anything else. She only wrote a few words on the paper and then pressed them under the piggy bank. Ao Wushuang couldn't help laughing. "Aren't you afraid that he won't see it?" A trace of cunning flashed in Su Chan's eyes. She said, "If Yundong really cares about this piggy bank, he will definitely find it." Ao Wushuang said, "Aren't you afraid that he won't care about it and won't find it?" Su Chan shook her head hard. "No, I believe him." Then, she took Ao Wushuang's hand and said, "Master, let's go back." Ao Wushuang sighed and said angrily and helplessly, "You be *** girl, I really can't do anything about you." After that, the two of them turned into a beam of blue light and left. 24 hours after they left, Li Yundong finally returned to the southern city of China from the distant Qinghai, Tibet plateau. After experiencing a bumpy and dusty journey, Li Yundong stumbled into his house. Last week, he ranked 8th on the flower list, and this week, he was still updated on the 2nd, 4th, and 6th, there are more and more flowers every week. Not bad, not bad. Those who are online can also come to the website to register an account and give me flowers. The more flowers you send, the higher your ranking is, the more I will break out. Fair trade, honest to the old and the young, hee. In addition, I recommend you GE's new book, The President's Second-Hand Bride. Those who like romance can go read it, Chapter 194. Go to the net. Oh my God! As soon as Li Yundong entered the house, he threw the fan of 7 treasures aside and collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath like a dead dog. To watch the net. Zi Yuan stood at the door and looked at Li Yundong with amusement. Are you exaggerating? Who would believe that you're a foundation establishment cultivator if they see you like this? Li Yundong lay on the floor, raised his hand, and struggled to say, you drove me all the way back, and I was squeezed all the way back at the train station. Even an immortal couldn't bear it. Damn it, there are too many people in China. The train station was crowded. Zi Yuan walked in, closed the door, and sat in a chair in the dining room. She pursed her lips and said with a smile, what does it have to do with me? Ever since this fairy-like woman had been in the state of racing, she seemed to have fallen from the sky into the mortal world. When she talked to Li Yundong, she couldn't help but feel a little more human. She was no longer as indifferent as before. Although she was smiling, her smile seemed to be as distant as a natural chasm. Li Yundong said weakly, anyway, I won't take your car in the future. The corners of Zi Yuan's mouth curled up. She brushed aside the black hair scattered around her cheek and said with a smile, did you get so crowded on the train? Why don't I feel crowded? Li Yundong raised his head and said with grief and indignation, nonsense, if I hadn't blocked for you, you would have been squeezed into a photo. How dare you make sarcastic remarks here? Zi Yuan shook her head and laughed. You traveled a long way. I didn't see you complain about being tired when you walked to Tibet. Why did you complain about being tired when you came back by train? I really don't understand you. Li Yundong laughed and struggled to get up. I don't understand you. You look like a fairy one moment, and then you look like a witch the next. Do you have a split personality? Zi Yuan was stunned, and the smile on her face suddenly disappeared. She became silent and did not say a word. Li Yundong's heart trembled. I was right. No way. He smiled embarrassedly, got up and said, I'm going to take a shower and change my clothes. I'm no different from a beggar in this outfit. As he spoke, he walked into his bedroom. After changing out of his dirty clothes, he threw them directly into the trash can. He found a change of clothes for himself and went into the bathroom. To watch the net. After all, taking a bath in the bathroom was different from taking a bath in the river. Li Yundong happily rubbed off all the mud on his body. After taking a bath, he felt as if his body had become 10 or 20 kilograms lighter. He only felt refreshed and comfortable all over. After Li Yundong came out shirtless, he was surprised to find that Zi Yuan was still sitting in the living room, as if she was thinking about something in a daze. He asked curiously, aren't you going back to take a shower? Zi Yuan seemed to wake up from a dream and turned to look at Li Yundong. She saw that the boy was half naked. The attack of the Renyuan Jindan and his own hard work made his upper body look like an inverted triangle. The lines of his muscles were almost perfect, not as exaggerated and terrifying as those of bodybuilders. However, his whole body was full of tendons and muscles, and under his leather-like skin, there was a strong explosive force. The boy's shoulders were very wide, and the deltoid muscles on his back were unusually developed, giving people a strong sense of security that even if the sky fell, he would be able to hold on. The 6 muscles on his abdomen were as hard as a layer of armor. After looking at Li Yundong for a while, she suddenly smiled and said, you still look like a beggar after taking a shower. Do you know why? Li Yundong looked at himself. After making sure that he was clean, he raised his head and said in confusion, I don't know. I've already washed it clean. Zi Yuan smiled and pointed at Li Yundong's face and hair. Go and look in the mirror. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He ran back to the bathroom, picked up the razor, and shaved his face clean. Suddenly, he changed from a bearded man to a handsome young man. The only flaw was that his hair was a little long, which made him look like a beetle. Li Yundong walked out of the bathroom, smiled, and said, I can't cut my hair by myself. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Zi Yuan smiled and said, do you have scissors in your house? Li Yundong was stunned. Yes, you want to help me cut it? Zi Yuan didn't answer. She just smiled faintly and sat quietly in her seat, looking at Li Yundong. Look at the net. 7 K.O.M. There was always a special power in this woman's eyes that could make people do something for her willingly. Li Yundong walked into the room and found the scissors. He handed them to her and said, can you do it? Zi Yuan pulled a chair from the dining table, pulled down the tablecloth on the table, and tied it around Li Yundong's neck. She smiled and said, it's not worse than driving. When Li Yundong heard this, his face turned ashen. He immediately wanted to jump up and run for the door, but Zi Yuan seemed to have expected his reaction. She put her hands on Li Yundong's shoulders and pressed him down. Li Yundong struggled hard, but he couldn't break free from Zi Yuan. He suddenly smiled bitterly and said, hey, don't mess around. If you can't cut it, I'll have to shave my head. I've never shaved a monk's head since I was a child. Zi Yuan didn't answer directly. She just cut off a section of his black hair with the scissors in her hand. Li Yundong's heart suddenly trembled. Well, she cut first and reported later. Forget it, just bear with it. As long as you don't shave a Mohican or a scabby head. Zi Yuan cut a few times and found that Li Yundong's face was full of bravery and fearlessness. His eyes were even more tragic than Lu Hulin's. She couldn't help laughing and said, don't worry, I raised Hongling since she was a child. I cut her hair. Do you think I can cut hair? When Li Yundong heard this, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He smiled and said, that's good. I thought you used my head as an experimental field. Zi Yuan pursed her lips and said with a smile, with your hair that looks like a chicken's nest, you still want to experiment with it. I think it's just a field of weeds at most. Li Yundong said with a smile, whether it's an experimental field or a field of weeds, don't mess around. Just cut it flat for me. Zi Yuan smiled faintly and said, I won't. Don't worry. Well, I can rest assured that you can do it. Although Li Yundong said that she was a good helper, he thought to himself, you have a criminal record first. I'm not at ease at all. Zi Yuan's hands were dexterous, and the scissors were fast. Li Yundong only felt that she was busy beside him. The scissors made a clicking sound, and his hair fell off piece by piece. He couldn't help but say, alas, it's only been 2 months. Why is it so long? Zi Yuan said, isn't there an answer in the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He patted his forehead and said, I understand. It's because my qi and blood are too vigorous, right? If my qi and blood are vigorous, my hair will also be vigorous. That's why my beard and hair grow so fast. Zi Yuan nodded slightly and said, cultivation is not only about practicing magic. You have to understand the operating rules of these magic, and you also have to understand the theory and scientific principles of cultivation. Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh and say, the scientific principles of cultivation. Hey, if it were in the past, I would have scoffed at this sentence, but now that I think about it, I really feel that there is some scientific principles in cultivation. Zi Yuan said lightly, what do you mean by there is some scientific principles? Let me ask you, what is the operating rule of a computer? Why can a few chips and circuit boards be able to transmit so many things and calculate such a huge number? Why does the computer respond when you click the mouse? What is the scientific principle in this? Li Yundong was tongue-tied. How would I know? Zi Yuan asked again, then do you know how an atomic bomb is made? What is the scientific principle in this? Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, I'm a liberal arts student. How would I know these things? Zi Yuan nodded and said, by the way, although you have 1 foot in the door of cultivation now, in fact, you have only stepped into the door of cultivation, but your thinking has not entered the door. Even though you've read the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor and have a general understanding of cultivation, you don't know much about the actual cultivation. The scientific principles of cultivation are the same as the scientific principles of computers and atomic bombs. If you don't learn and study them, you will always feel that these things are inconceivable. It's like looking at flowers in the fog. It's incredible. Li Yundong sighed and said, I understand what you're going to say. I'll go to the Xinhua bookstore tomorrow. Zi Yuan laughed and said, what are you going to do there? Li Yundong asked in confusion, didn't you take me there to buy books last time? Zi Yuan shook her head and laughed. Why don't you remember after telling you so many times? Sometimes, the great Tao is under your feet, but you haven't paid attention to it. Li Yundong was stunned. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, you mean, the school library? Zi Yuan nodded and said, yes, although Tiannan University is a third-rate school, its library is still good. The collection of books is very comprehensive. You can find a lot of knowledge you want to learn in it. Li Yundong smiled and said, that's good. It saves me money. After that, he suddenly thought of something and said, by the way, the new semester is about to start, right? It seems to be in the next 2 days. Alas, I don't know how Zhou Qin is doing. Will she be implicated by my affairs? As soon as Li Yundong thought of this, his thoughts drifted far away. The scene of him leading the heavenly thunder to kill young master he seemed to be still vivid in his mind. Zhou Qin had said that she would help him avoid this matter, but after all, he had killed someone, and it seemed that the person was a second generation with a very strong background. He didn't know how Zhou Qin was doing now. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh. He knew that Zhou Qin liked him, so she had been silently contributing. However, he didn't accept her help. She had helped him block the wind and rain, but he hadn't contacted her at all in the past 2 months. This was a little unreasonable. Thinking of this, Li Yundong wanted to call Zhou Qin, but as soon as he thought of this, he smiled bitterly. His phone had been sold, and he didn't remember her number. How could he contact her? It seemed that he had to wait until school started. Li Yundong sighed. It was fine that Zhou Qin didn't know the news, but what about Su Chan? What about the little girl? Was she okay? It would have been fine if Li Yundong didn't think about it. When he thought about it, he felt that his longing for her was like a tide, almost burying him. Li Yundong couldn't wait to pass the heavenly tribulation immediately and then fly with the little girl. But Li Yundong knew that cultivation was like sailing against the current, going against the heavens. Chapter 195. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong sat in his seat in a daze. Zi Yuan, who was behind him, seemed to have sensed what he was thinking. She couldn't help glancing at him, and a trace of emotion flashed through her eyes. Go to the Watch Net. 7 KOM. She thought to herself, this man, he hasn't even passed the heavenly tribulation yet, but he's already worried about others. He's really a person who has tender feelings for women. He's quite like my master. Seeing that Zi Yuan didn't speak, Li Yundong was silent for a while, then continued the topic just now. Speaking of which, I thought you would continue to teach me magic without stopping, but I didn't expect you to ask me to go back to school to study. In fact, I don't understand. Why do I have to go back to school when I've already started cultivating? Zi Yuan used her hand to lift Li Yundong's long hair by his ear and cut it with a knife. She said, cultivation is divided into 2 kinds, cultivation in the secular world and cultivation in the secular world. Some cultivators have been cultivating in the secular world all their lives, while others have been cultivating in the secular world all their lives. There is no difference between the two, but no matter which one it is, there will inevitably be flaws and regrets. People who have been cultivating in the secular world all their lives will not be affected by the secular world. Their skills are pure and their strength is strong, but in fact, their Taoist heart has not been tested and tempered. Once they meet a cultivator with a strong will and whose skills are not far from theirs, they will most likely be defeated. Li Yundong listened attentively and couldn't help asking, "Why is that?" Zi Yuan stopped and said solemnly, "You must remember that the battle between cultivators is not about who has higher skills. Otherwise, you would have become a pile of bones on the Qinghai Tibet plateau by now. Wu Hao and LV Fengping's cultivation is much higher than yours. The reason why they lost to you is that their will is not firm enough. They don't have your strong will in the face of danger." Li Yundong suddenly understood. "Oh, I understand what you mean. Can this kind of will be understood as the Taoist heart? When fighting, you must guard your Taoist heart and not let others break it." Zi Yuan smiled slightly. "You can say that." Li Yundong laughed. "I see. Go on." Zi Yuan continued, "It's not necessarily a good thing to cultivate in the secular world all your life. Similarly, it's not necessarily a good thing to cultivate in the secular world all your life." Like a diligent and inquisitive student, Li Yundong asked, "Why is that? Isn't it better to temper one's willpower in the secular world, to temper one's willpower until it's like steel?" Zi Yuan sighed and said, "Jia Yi of the Han dynasty once said in a poem about Chu Yuan, 'Heaven and earth are the furnace, creation is the work, yin and yang are the carbon, and all things are the copper.'" Watch net. 7 KOM. From this sentence, you can see the difficulty of entering the world to cultivate. Li Yundong seemed to have touched something in his heart, but it was a little unclear. It was vague and hazy. He said, "Go on, I'm listening." Zi Yuan explained, "This sentence fully explains the difficulty of entering the secular world to cultivate. You see, heaven and earth are like a big furnace. Everything in this world is the copper in this furnace, being burned and roasted by it. You have to know that if you stay in this furnace for a long time, under the influence of fate, the copper will be burned and turn into other shapes. Yin and yang refer to our human bodies. If we are carbon, we can't avoid the fate of being burned and roasted." Li Yundong's eyes lit up. He said, "I understand. You mean, if you enter the secular world too deeply, it will be easy for you to be dragged down by the things in the secular world. If you change, it will affect your own cultivation." Zi Yuan nodded and praised, "You're right. This principle is the same as the cultivation law of Dharma, wealth, companion and earth tools. If you don't have money, you have to think about daily necessities all day long. How can you calm down and cultivate? So, if you stay in a company or other places where you have to fight and scheme all day long, how can you cultivate? Cultivation is not about jumping out of this world and looking down at it from a high vantage point. It's about being in it and turning yourself into a piece of good copper and iron. In this big furnace of heaven and earth, you can be tempered and forged into the best equipment." Li Yundong drew inferences and said, "So, the school is the best place in this world. It doesn't have the intrigue and dirty things in other places. It's relatively pure and quiet, and there's a lot of information to read. There's plenty of time, and you can move freely, so." Zi Yuan didn't wait for him to finish and continued with a smile, "So, it's good to cultivate in the ivory tower." After that, she suddenly had an idea and smiled. "By the way, there will be an acquaintance coming to your school this year." Li Yundong suddenly became curious. "A freshman? An acquaintance? I know him. Who is it?" Before Zi Yuan could say anything, she heard the sound of someone opening the door with a key. Zi Yuan immediately laughed and turned her head to look at the door. Li Yundong also turned around and looked at the door. The two of them looked over and saw that it was Ruan Hongling who had walked in. Ruan Hongling was carrying a few plastic bags in her hands, which contained all kinds of vegetables, fruits, and daily necessities. When she saw Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, she was stunned and then overjoyed. But when she was overjoyed, she was surprised to find that Zi Yuan was leaning against Li Yundong intimately. She immediately said in surprise and doubt, "You, what are you doing?" Zi Yuan knew her shimmy very well. She rolled her eyes at Hongling and said, "What do you think?" Only then did Ruan Hongling see the hair on the ground at Li Yundong's feet. She immediately bared her teeth and said, "I just cleaned the room. Why is it so dirty again?" Although Li Yundong had always had conflicts with Ruan Hongling, especially before he left, he had a big quarrel with her. But after 2 months, no matter how big his resentment was, it had dissipated a lot. Although he couldn't greet this girl with a smile, he could still say a few words to her normally. "Go to the internet. Did you clean this room?" Li Yundong couldn't help asking. "Could it be that you cleaned it?" Ruan Hongling snorted coldly. Li Yundong didn't care about it, but she still bore a grudge in her heart. Only then did Li Yundong notice that the windows and glass in the room had been replaced. It was not as drafty as before. He couldn't help but sigh and thank her. "Thank you so much. I haven't been back for 2 months, but this room hasn't been covered in dust." Ruan Hongling snorted, turned her head to one side, and said indifferently, "As long as some people don't think I'm meddlesome." Li Yundong smiled bitterly. Why is this girl so vengeful? Zi Yuan turned her head and glared at Ruan Hongling. Ruan Hongling also made a face and carried the plastic bag into the kitchen. "I guess you will be back in a few days, so I've bought the food." "Li Yundong, although you are very annoying, you still cook well. Why don't you make a few dishes later, and I'll reluctantly give you face and have a meal as a thank you." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "You really should be a businessman. You won't lose out no matter what. You've taken advantage of me, yet you still act like a good girl." Zi Yuan also smiled and said, "Don't bother with her. She's just a child. She's not bad at heart, but a little willful." Ruan Hongling poked her head out of the kitchen and protested loudly, "I'm not a child anymore. I'm a college student." Zi Yuan laughed and said, "You'll be a college student in a few days." Li Yundong turned his head and asked, "You're going to college? Which school?" Zi Yuan was cutting his hair. Just as she was about to cut the scissors, she saw Li Yundong suddenly turn his face away. Fortunately, she didn't cut a big gap. Zi Yuan suddenly patted Li Yundong on the head angrily and said, "Turn your head." Li Yundong immediately turned his head obediently and looked straight ahead. Ruan Hongling chuckled and teased, "Hey, you're being henpecked so soon." Hearing this, Zi Yuan's cheeks suddenly turned red, and she glared at Ruan Hongling angrily. Li Yundong also coughed, looking embarrassed. For a moment, he didn't dare to say another word or move. Although Zi Yuan didn't throw away Li Yundong's half-cut hair because of this sentence, her movements had become stiff and unnatural. After she finally finished, she threw down the scissors and said, "Go and see for yourself." After that, she ran into the kitchen to teach Ruan Hongling a lesson. Li Yundong was not in the mood to look in the mirror because of what Ruan Hongling had said. He sat there in a daze for a while, then went back to his bedroom to look in the full-length mirror. With just one glance, he couldn't help but be amazed by Zi Yuan's haircutting skills. Zi Yuan didn't cut Li Yundong's hair very short. She just cut off a lot of his messy hair, making his hair elegant and chic, and his whole temperament became ethereal. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh. This fairy is really a fairy. She can cut such an elegant and classical aura with just a haircut. I admire her. He smiled and looked carefully in the mirror for a while, but suddenly he saw the pillow on the bed and the money bank next to it in the mirror. Li Yundong was stunned. He found that the money bank was upside down. In the past, his head was up, but now it was down. A trace of displeasure flashed through Li Yundong's heart. Why did Wan Hongling touch my things again? He thought to himself, I must tell her not to touch my things later. Li Yundong thought to himself. He walked to the bedside and picked up the money bank, but as soon as he picked it up, he found a note under it. Li Yundong picked up the note curiously and glanced at it. He saw 3 big words written on it, I miss you. Li Yundong's eyes suddenly widened. He was so excited that his hands were trembling, and his chest was about to explode with joy. He rushed out of the bedroom like crazy and shouted in the living room like a demon, she came back, the girl came back. Wan Hongling and Zi Yuan, who were busy cooking in the kitchen, poked their heads out at the same time and looked at Li Yundong in confusion. They looked at each other, and Wan Hongling muttered, what's wrong with him? Zi Yuan shook her head. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be the first time he's gone crazy. When Wan Hongling heard this, she immediately smiled ambiguously and said, Shiji, what else have you seen? Zi Yuan glared at her angrily. Shut up. Li Yundong was shouting and dancing in the living room. As soon as he saw Wan Hongling and Zi Yuan, he immediately rushed over, shaking the note in his hand excitedly, and said loudly, she came back, she came to see me. Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling's eyes followed the shaking note in Li Yundong's hand. No matter how they looked at it, they could only see 3 words, I miss you. Wan Hongling asked in confusion, who came to see you? Li Yundong shouted with ecstasy, Su Chan, my girl, she came back to see me. Wan Hongling immediately retracted her head with a disapproving look on her face. She wanted to give Li Yundong a blow, but seeing his ecstatic expression, she couldn't bear it. However, she didn't want him to be too arrogant, so she couldn't help saying, Humph, who knows if she wrote it. Li Yundong said with a serious face, it must be her. Wan Hongling said unconvinced, how do you know? Maybe it was written by a thief. Li Yundong was in a good mood at this time, so he didn't argue with her. He just glanced at Wan Hongling and Zi Yuan proudly and snorted. People who have never been in love won't know. Humph, of course, a shrewish woman like you, no matter how beautiful you are, probably can't find a boyfriend. You don't understand. This is called having a telepathic connection. I know it was written by her, so it must have been written by her. Wan Hongling was a little driven crazy by Li Yundong's words. Be asterisk starred, it's not that I haven't been in love, it's that I don't want to be in love. It's not that I can't find one, it's that I don't want to find one. Zi Yuan couldn't help but be lost in thought. She looked at Li Yundong's ecstatic and uncontrollable appearance and said to herself in confusion, it's just 3 words. Can you be so happy when you love someone? She and Wan Hongling were in a daze and Li Yundong was going crazy, but Li Yundong rushed to the balcony. He put his hands around his mouth to make a trumpet and leaned out. Li Yundong took a deep breath and shouted, I miss you, too. As he shouted, his voice traveled through the boundless sky and into the distance. It seemed as if it would travel to the ends of the earth and would not dissipate for a long time. Li Yundong looked at the distant sky. The little girl's voice and smile seemed to be dancing in front of him. He unconsciously burst into tears and said foolishly, girl, I miss you, too. /om/. Chapter 196. Go to watch net. Li Yundong's shout seemed to have reached the distant Dongwu city. Su Chan, who was meditating and practicing qi at home, suddenly opened her eyes. She stood up in surprise and joy, walked out of the room, opened the window, and looked around. Watch net. 7KO-/ But apart from the antique bluestone pavement, the white walls and black tiles, and the fashionably dressed passers-by, there was nothing else. Ao Wushuang's unhappy voice came from the room. "Chaner, what's wrong with you again?" "I heard Li Yundong calling me," Su Chan said as she returned to her room. Ao Wushuang sighed and couldn't help rubbing her temples. "Are you done? Didn't you promise me that you would cultivate in peace after coming back? Look at you, you haven't made any progress in the past 2 months. Li Yundong has succeeded in the Zhuji phase in just 2 months. Don't you feel ashamed?" Su Chan giggled. "What's there to be embarrassed about? The stronger he becomes, the happier I will be." Ao Wushuang couldn't help but say angrily, "Chaner, come over here, meditate and practice your qi." Su Chan saw that her master was angry, so she didn't dare to neglect him. She obediently returned to the futon, sat down, and muttered, "I just heard it." Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. "How could you hear me from hundreds of kilometers away? Do you think he can transmit his voice from 1,000 miles away?" Su Chan raised her head and snorted. "I have a telepathic connection with him." Ao Wushuang was flustered and exasperated. Just as she was about to reprimand him, there was a knock on the door. Then a figure came in. He was short and thin, with a face full of wrinkles. He was an old man. The old man's eyes were lowered, and he was wearing a gray running coat and a pair of navy blue cloth shoes. His hands were tucked into his sleeves, and he wore a black skullcap on his head. Coupled with the 2 thin and long beards on his face, he looked somewhat comical, like an old landlord in the old society. Su Chan turned her head and suddenly jumped up in fright. She stammered, "Grandmaster." When Ao Wushuang saw this person, she immediately stood up and nodded slightly. She looked a little surprised and vigilant as she said, "Uncle Master, why are you here?" The leader of the Fox Zen school walked into the room and looked around. He saw that the furnishings in the room were simple. Except for a square table, 2 stools, and 2 futons, there was nothing else. "Watch net." He sighed and said, "Wushuang, why are there only 2 chairs here? Even if there are guests, there's no way to sit." Ao Wushuang smiled faintly and said, "Will there be guests here? Shouldn't others be hiding from me?" The sect leader sighed. He walked to the stool and sat cross-legged on it. After he sat down, he took out a purple tobacco pipe with a goldfish inlaid on it. He took out a jade opium pipe and filled it with tobacco leaves. He didn't light up the pipe, he just took 2 puffs, and the tobacco in the pipe ignited on its own. Almost 10 years have passed. Are you still holding a grudge? The sect leader spat out a smoke ring. He watched the smoke ring float up and slowly disperse. Let bygones be bygones. The affairs of the world are like smoke. How can they not disperse? Ao Wushuang's expression was surprisingly cold. Uncle Master, with your temper, I don't think you would come here to tell me this, would you? The sect leader smiled slightly. It seems that you still hate me for driving you out of the sect. Ao Wushuang sneered coldly. I wouldn't dare. How could I dare to hate the leader of the Fox Zen school, Lu Yi, who is known as the Flying Fox? I'm already a wandering ghost. If I hold a grudge against the sect leader of my own clan, wouldn't that be courting death? Lu Yi laughed, and the wrinkles on his face suddenly became very deep. He tapped the ash in the pipe and said, You still say that you don't hate me? Look at you, your words are full of resentment. I drove you out of the sect in order to protect you. I believe that with your intelligence, you will definitely understand. Ao Wushuang's eyes suddenly became vicissitudes of life. She sighed and said, It's one thing to understand, and it's another thing to forgive. Tell me, don't beat around the bush. You don't come here for nothing. What are you doing here? Lu Yi sighed and said, I came here to tell you to go back and have a look when you have time. To see the net. 7 K.O.M. If one day you want to go back and have a look, you won't be able to see it. Ao Wushuang suddenly frowned. What do you mean by that? Lu Yi was not in a hurry to speak. He took a few puffs of his cigarette and stood up from the stool. He slowly put away his pipe, walked slowly to the door with his hands behind his back, and stopped. He said, the 6 great sects unanimously believe that our Fox Zen school has swallowed Renyuan Jindan. They will join forces to attack our Fox Zen school in at least 2 months and at most half a year. You are the best master in our Fox Zen school. It's up to you whether you will come back or not. With that, he walked out of the door. Ao Wushuang couldn't help but shout, why did you say that you didn't steal it? Did I steal it? Lu Yi stopped, turned around, and smiled with a face full of sarcasm and ridicule. Is it any use? Since when would those righteous sects listen to us demons and devils? Isn't it just a matter of a few words for them to kill us? Besides, although you have been expelled from the sect, even if you turn into ashes, others will still think that you are a member of the Fox Zen school, because no matter how much you change your appearance, you can't change the fact that you are a 7-tailed divine fox. Ao Wushuang was silent. After a moment of silence, she said, how can we resist the joint attack of the 6 great sects? Why don't you let the sisters of our sect hide first? Lu Yi laughed and said, our Fox Zen school has had a history of more than 1,200 years since it was founded by Ancestor Rock in the period of Emperor Xianzong of Tang Dynasty. Over the years, there have been so many sects that have wanted to destroy our Fox Zen school, but what has been the result? Humph, although we have declined now, if they attack us, we will run away. The next time they attack, we will run away again. If this goes on, where will we find shelter in the world? After that, Lu Yi snorted and walked out of the door with his hands behind his back. His voice came from afar, you have 2 months to think about it. Ao Wushuang sat in the room in a daze for a while. She suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice, Chana, prepare the luggage. Su Chan answered and went back to the room. She tidied up her clothes a little and dragged her suitcase out. She said, Master, are we going back to the sect? As she spoke, there was an indescribable excitement and joy in the little girl's words. Ao Wushuang glanced at her and couldn't help but show a trace of pity and love in her eyes. When she had taken Su Chan out of the sect, Su Chan was only a little over 6 years old. She was still a little girl, and her impression of the sect was very faint. Ao Wushuang sighed in her heart and said, it's not us, it's just me. Su Chan was shocked. Master, aren't you going to take me back to the sect? Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, no, it's very dangerous this time. Our Fox Zen school is even in danger of being destroyed. It's too dangerous for you to follow me. Go find your lover. He will take good care of you. As long as he gets through the divine tribulation and your identity is not exposed, you will be fine. Su Chan's face was surprisingly firm. She shook her head and said, Master, if the sect is gone, so what if I'm left alone? Let me go with you. I have some responsibility for this matter. Ao Wushuang said angrily, why do you always have to go against me? Haven't you been clamoring to go back to Yundong all day long? Now that I've let you go, why don't you want to go? Su Chan said, Master, you brought me up when I was a child. You taught me how to read and how to cultivate magic. If I run away alone at the slightest danger, wouldn't I be the most ungrateful person in the world? If Yundong finds out, he will also be angry and abandon me. If I can abandon you today, won't I be able to abandon him tomorrow? Ao Wushuang laughed, feeling a little gratified and a little helpless. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly looked behind Su Chan and said in surprise, why are you here? After that, she was about to hit Su Chan's neck with her palm. But before she could do anything, Su Chan seemed to have seen through her thoughts. Not only did she not look back, but she jumped a few meters away from Ao Wushuang and said warily, "Master, do you want to knock me out and go back to the Fox Zen school alone?" Ao Wushuang saw that the girl usually looked careless and a little silly, but in fact, she was as smart and cunning as herself. She smiled helplessly and said, "Forget it, let's go." "You win." The girl still refused to approach. Her eyes rolled around and her face was full of suspicion. "You can't lie to me." Ao Wushuang looked at her angrily and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Follow me." With that, she dragged her luggage and turned to leave. The girl hurriedly followed behind. As she chased after her, she said, "Oh, master, wait for me." After catching up with Ao Wushuang, she said, "Master, can I tell Yundong about this? After all, he is the successor of the Jindan stage. He can help." Ao Wushuang snorted coldly and said, "Will he? Our Fox Zen school has a bad reputation now. Even the slightly sanctimonious cultivators are afraid of us. Moreover, if the 6 great sects find out that he has swallowed the Jindan, they will catch him and stew him." Su Chan quickly said, "No, he knows who I am, and he has never despised me." Ao Wushuang still replied coldly, "Oh. However, even if he comes, it's useless. He has just reached the Zhuji phase and has no magic at all. If he comes, he will die." Su Chan pursed her lips and said, "Oh." She didn't say anything else. Almost at the same time, in the distant Tiannan city, Li Yundong was pointing at the heavy fan of 7 treasures and said in surprise, "What? Tomorrow is the first day of school. You want me to carry this thing to school?" Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong and said, "Yes, this fan of 7 treasures is a high-grade magical item. It has its own spiritual magic power. As long as it is connected with its master's mind, it can be controlled by Shentong to display its powerful power. Only if you carry it with you all day long can it slowly become familiar with your aura. In this way, you can get twice the result with half the effort in the future. Moreover, do you dare to leave such a precious magical item at home?" Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong with a smile. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly. He looked up and down at the fan of 7 treasures, which was nearly as tall as a person and weighed more than 50 kilograms. He muttered in his heart, "It's too exaggerated to carry such a big guy to school, /om/. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.